We shall see.
And we're live. Welcome. Welcome, livers. We are live streaming. We are early. We're getting situated and set. But if you're here early, thank you. Welcome. Find a seat. Make yourselves comfortable. Today is Sunday, the day of pasta. The perfect day of the week for making pasta. Bella in the building, as always, on the chat room. If you're here early, welcome. We're just getting started. We're getting situated. We still have a couple of minutes. I just like to start presenting early. Make sure there are no technical difficulties. YouTube sometimes has a tendency of being technically difficult. Am I right?
On occasion.
On occasion.
Only.
Hopefully this isn't one of those occasions.
Only once or twice at a time.
Twice. And that was a long time ago.
That was a long time
We've come a long way since then.
Yes, we have.
So welcome everyone if you're here. I can see the chat room too here today.
Yeah, where is everyone from?
I see Red Bluff in the house again. Welcome back.
Hi.
You can have the same seat as last time, or you can come up closer since you're returning second time. No, Bella says no. Bella says I'm being stupid.
Yeah.
Silly jokes.
I never said those words. Those are not nice words.
Welcome everyone. Everybody signing on. We're slowly gaining visitors. Visitors? People signing on. I don't know what they're called. Attendees, visitors, guests, friends. They're pasta friends. Pasta friends are slowly joining. We're just getting everyone signed in. We're getting everyone situated. Everybody, please put your name tag on so we know what to call each other. Do not forget to wear your name tag. I know it's been a while.
Woodland Hills, Riverside, California, Seattle, New York City, Calgary.
Calgary, Canada?
Yeah.
Calgary, Canada.
Milwaukee, hi everyone.
Nice. All over the country.
Hungary.
All over North America. All over the world. Yes.
Cool.
Holding it down from Hungary. So much fun.
Nashville,
I love it.
Cambridge, Massachusetts, from Puerto Rico. Originally.
Puerto Rico.
Cool.
Fun. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. Yeah. We're here early. Don't worry. You haven't missed anything. We haven't started yet.
Austin,
We're
Texas.
just getting situated.
We're sending you our love, Texas.
Yes, stay safe, Texas.
Jersey, Chicago.
All over. I love it. Thank you, everyone. Welcome.
So exciting. DC,
Are there any
Tampa.
first timers or repeats? Where are we at? I want to know. Those are the things that I'm more curious about. I've been doing this for a while now. We are coming up on a year of doing these live stream pasta parties. So it's definitely come a long way in terms of production. I think the very first one was April?
Oh man, almost a year.
Almost a year. And we're in February-ish? Mm-hmm. So we're coming up on it, but if this is your first time, welcome. You picked the best one to come to because everyone is better than the last. Because we're always striving to be better every single day. Never perfection, just progress. That's what's important.
There's a couple of first time, second class. Yay.
Very fun.
Washington, Maine, Baltimore, Minnesota, Bear Valley Springs is here. Lots of everyone from all over. So good.
So much fun.
Yeah.
Oh man, I just had a crazy, silly thought pop in my head. I was looking at the chat room and I was like, oh look, all the people's names, and for half a moment I almost felt like a Peloton instructor because I saw people's names and I wanted to give people shout outs like they do on the live rides, but we're not going to do that because I'm not a Peloton instructor and this is not Peloton. But if you are a rider, a cyclist, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, just things that pop into my head. Now you guys know. These are the things I think about when I'm standing here waiting for the class to start.
I feel like I'm like a radio host because you can never see my
face.
face.
You can never see her. She's like behind the microphone. Behind the scenes, pushing the switches, turning knobs, dials, buttons.
I mean, I may be just an AI for all you know.
Yeah, she might not even be real. Anything's possible these days. Well, it's 2:01. Shall we begin? Shall we get started?
2:01 having fun, chef.
2:01 having fun. Sunday pasta party. Welcome everyone. If it is your first time, thank you so much for being here. If it is not your first time and you're back, thank you even more for giving me another opportunity to cook and to teach and to spend some time with you. I love doing these virtual live streams like this because it's the closest thing I get to do for actually cooking for others is the opportunity to get to cook with others. I can't actually be with people right now. So for the time being, I appreciate everyone inviting me into your homes. We're here. We're hanging out. We have the whole afternoon to spend together. So take advantage of the chat room. That's our form of communication. Obviously, there's no cameras there, so I can't see you, but you can see me. And I want to be able to chat. I want to be able to answer your questions. This is interactive. This is your time to hang out with not only me, but a chef. I imagine it's not every day you get to hang out with a chef. So take advantage of this opportunity, whether we're talking about pasta or we're talking about my favorite color, whatever it is. Bring it on. I love the interactive chat room. That's what Bella's here for. She's monitoring the chat. She's reading off of the questions. She's keeping all of us engaged and helping me stay on track. That being said, staying on track. The recipe and this whole cook-along style is designed in sort of a linear format. So if you have a question about maybe cooking this pasta that we would do at the end, hold that question back. Save it. Put it into your back pocket. When we get to the end, we're actually cooking pasta. Then you can drop that question into the chat room just so we're not all over the place throwing people off, because I want to keep everybody engaged. I want to keep everybody understanding of what's happening. And if we just start talking about all which, this, and that, it can get confusing. So we want to avoid that. Cooking should be fun.
Centered.
Cooking should be peaceful and tranquil, and we should have a good time while doing it. None of this should be stressful. That being said, some things that would already be done, which will alleviate the stress because you had days, well, I would say at least a day, to do it in advance. Maybe some of you did it this morning. We're talking about our pasta doughs. I know questions take about a minute or so to populate in the chat due to live delays. So if you have any questions about the pasta dough making or process or anything regarding the dough, we'll start there. So any questions there, drop it in and we will address that immediately. While we're waiting for those questions to roll in, just some housekeeping notes, I suppose. This is getting recorded. So if you can't make it, you have to hop off, you need to pause, any of those things, you're going to get a recording of this. Right, well, I can't say right after because it takes, an hour or so to upload to the internet because, nothing happens instantaneous. But as soon as it gets uploaded to the internet, I will resend out via the Chef's Feed app, the messaging system, a link to the recording, which you'll have forever. The recipe page is there for yours to keep. The dough making videos as well. I hope those were helpful. I find it makes the most of our time together by having those dough making videos in your hand in advance, one by hand and one with a machine. And then you can apply it to any time that you're making pasta, whether you're using colors or not. Speaking of the colors, right? We're talking about vegetable powders. That's my favorite way to color pasta doughs. There's a couple of reasons I choose vegetable powders over, say, a vegetable puree. Let's spend a couple minutes talking about that because for me, it was something I don't even want to say recently anymore, but something that I've changed. I used to make beet puree. I used to make spinach puree. Used to use those purees to then color the pasta dough and flavor the pasta dough, and you get all these bright, vibrant colors, which is great. And it's a way to do it. There's nothing wrong with that way of doing it. But if you've never worked with freeze-dried vegetable powders, I encourage you to at least give it a try for a number of reasons. When you're pureeing a vegetable, you're keeping all of that water in there, and you're essentially then adding a bunch of spinach-flavored water or beet-flavored water to your dough. That's doing two things. Pasta dough doesn't normally necessarily have water in it. So you're going to have to drastically adjust your ratio, either by using more flour, reducing the amount of eggs in there, and so your recipe kind of changes depending on the thickness of your puree, if it's really thin, if it's really thick, if it has lots of water, if it has a little bit of water, and your dough recipe is not necessarily as consistent when you're dealing with a puree. Now, if we switch over and we're using vegetable powders, like I do, freeze-dried, there's no water in those. It's completely removed. The vegetable is in powder form in its stable, pristine state. So in that case, very little needs to be done to the recipe to adjust things. No decrease in flour, no increase in eggs. Occasionally, you may need to use a spritz or two of water, depending on how much powder you're putting in there. But for the most part, you could usually just add it within 5 to 20% based on the weight of the flour. What I mean by percent is you take the total weight of the flour, 300 grams, for example, 20% of 300 grams would give you the weight of vegetable powder to add in order to flavor and color your dough. Do we have any questions yet?
Yes, we do. If you want to hold your doughs.
Yes, so I have my doughs here.
Great. One first question is, I used vegetable food coloring, but found it did not spread evenly when mixing. Do you have a solution for this?
Oh, vegetable food coloring. I wonder if that's a new thing. I haven't used that before, and I wonder what that is. I imagine it's food coloring made from vegetables, so maybe chlorophyll, maybe beet juice, maybe turmeric powder, things like that put into a liquid. The best thing I would recommend to do if you're going to use a liquid colorant like that is to mix it in completely with your eggs. So just like when you're using a powder, like the freeze-dried powder, I like to whisk it into my flour or mix it into my flour as I'm adding my eggs. I would take that liquid food coloring, whether it's vegetable based or not, and add it to my eggs. Mix that so you have dyed eggs essentially. Then you're adding that liquid to your flour mix, and you're able to then incorporate that evenly through the whole dough. Other questions?
But it could be cool if it's not.
But if it's like kind of pearly, marbly kind of pattern, that could be cool too.
That could be really cool.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome.
Our colored pasta is harder than the natural colored pasta. Is that okay?
It is okay. It depends how much harder you mean. Like this feels almost identical to this, and they're the same exact amount of eggs, the same exact thing. This one has 10 grams of spinach powder. This one is just eggs. This is ever so slightly softer than this, but for the most part, I wouldn't necessarily say it's harder, especially after it rests. Definitely during the kneading process, it could feel much harder because it takes longer for things to hydrate. And if you ever run into that problem, I mentioned it in the videos, but I'll cover it again because it's like one of those back pocket tricks that a lot of people overlook and don't realize. When you're kneading pasta dough, whether you're doing it in a machine or by hand, if you get to the point where it seems super hard, you can't knead it, you're having to put your entire body weight into it, it's really tough, it's not coming together, it's not sticking to itself, just flip your bowl over the top, invert it, cover it in plastic wrap, do something, just cover the dough and set it on the counter and walk away. Go have a glass of water, go have an espresso, go pet the dog, whatever it is, just give yourself 5 or 10 minutes. And sometimes all the dough needs is to hydrate with the flour. Flour and water don't just hydrate instantly, or flour and egg in this case. So by giving yourself 5 or 10 minutes, once the dough is already kind of somewhat coming together, being kneaded, and then waiting, and then coming back, you're going to find that just within that 5 to 10 minutes, the dough has become much more softer. It's already started to hydrate, and then you'll be able to finish the kneading for that last 5 minutes or so, whatever it needs, much more easily and much more fluidly.
Yes, next question is for Lauren. I am confused about how to do the laminating portion of the pasta rolling. I've never done that step.
So we're going to get to that. Laminating, rolling, sheeting. Me personally, I don't want to dive too far into it. I don't laminate my pasta dough anymore. It's something I stopped doing maybe 3 or 4 years ago, once I really started understanding a lot of the processes that go into pre-shaping, kneading, rolling, and sheeting. And if you do all of the steps leading up to the machine as well as you can, and the way I don't want to say should, as well as you can, then you don't need to laminate. I find that laminating step, and for anyone that's not following along, laminating is like when you would roll out a sheet, you'd fold it over itself in half. So then you have a double layer, and then you put that double layer back through to make it a single layer again, and you keep doing that over and over. It's a process called lamination, hence the name, you're laminating. I find you only need to laminate if you didn't do the kneading correctly, if you didn't do the pre-shaping correctly, if you didn't do the kind of pre-rolling correctly before it goes into the machine, then you kind of need to laminate to fix all of those issues. Where if you do everything right from the get-go, is that a saying? From the beginning. If you do everything right from the beginning, you don't need to laminate. And that's something I've shifted away from. Not to necessarily say that, it's superior or whatever, but I prefer it that way. And it saves time. It's easier.
Gina says, I didn't have vegetable powder, so I dehydrated spinach and made my own. It looks a bit rustic, but it worked. Great. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. Keep in mind, a dehydrator dehydrates things under a temperature. So you're essentially kind of heating up the spinach and you could lose color. What's great about freeze drying is it happens quickly at a low temperature, so you don't degrade or cook any of the product that you're turning to powder. So that's kind of the biggest, easiest way to wrap your head around versus a freeze dried product versus a dehydrated product.
Justin says, dough question. I goofed and didn't take my dough out of the fridge until about 30 minutes ago. I've done that before and it usually works fine, but do you have any tips for that?
A couple things you could do. Ideally, you want to be working with dough that's soft and room temperature, like 1 to 2 hours out of the fridge. I'm not saying you can't do it 30 minutes or with cold dough. It's just much harder. It's not going to roll as easily. It's not going to roll as efficiently. You just may run into like sheeting issues and the dough tearing or not stretching as well as it could. Something you could do is like sometimes I throw it in the oven with the oven light on, not the oven on, just the light on the oven. And the light sometimes increases the temperature of the oven like 5 or 10 degrees. So it's about 80, 85 in there, which helps temper things more quickly. You could do the butter, like if there's a method where if like you need a stick of softened butter for baking, you would take a bowl or a glass, fill it up with boiling water or hot water, dump the water out, and then put the glass or the bowl over the stick of butter on the counter for 5 minutes or so. And the ambient temperature from the inside of the bowl or the glass or whatever you're using will soften the butter or could soften the dough. So 2 little tricks and tips that could work to help speed along your process.
And by the time we're working with it, it should be okay then.
Yeah, and you might be okay because we're making the filling too. So we're going to do the filling first before we get to rolling. I just wanted to start with dough because it's something you guys did without me. Well, I was kind of there. We were watching videos. But I didn't actually get to see you do it. You didn't get to ask questions. So I wanted to start with that just to get any of those questions out of the way before we jump into the filling.
Paul says, how many yolks? Recipe calls for 13. The video showed fewer.
So I would go with the recipe. The video, what you saw, if you were counting the exact amount of yolks in it, probably was for a different recipe and a different use. Where I have essentially like 2 different recipes that I go back and forth on depending on how I'm using my pasta dough. One of which uses mostly yolks. I find is better and easier to work with, especially when you're learning to sheet pasta. When you're working with colors and patterns, it's not as elastic, it's not as stretchy, and it's not as protein driven from all those extra whites. What you may have seen in the video, if you're paying that close of attention, was a different recipe I use when I want a more toothsome pasta dough, when I don't want a bunch of whites left over. But for me, I find that dough is a little harder for the average person to work with because it is stretchier, it is more elastic, it is more extensible. And at the end of the day, the process is the same. The technique is the same. The things you're looking for in the dough, the way you need it, the way it comes together, the visual cues you're paying attention to are all identical. There's no different depending on if you use lots of eggs or a little bit of eggs or whichever recipe you're using. And so, I developed a secondary recipe for everyone out there that was like, oh, I don't want that many egg whites left over. I hate eating egg white omelets. I don't want to make cookies, whatever. And so that's like kind of an alternative recipe I have that I don't usually use. It's not the best for a class like this because that extra stretchiness of the dough doesn't necessarily work well when you're trying to create patterns because the dough becomes way too stretchy and more difficult to work with. So good eye, first of all, for catching that. And second of all, that's the answer.
Yeah, the recipe has the answer. Catherine said it's out of a dropper like a food coloring, LOL.
Oh, the vegetable dropper.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. It makes sense that they
Very
have
cool.
those things because nobody wants to eat food coloring anymore, but people still like to color things. And so natural food coloring seems like a great invention.
Yeah. Messeret, correct me if I pronounced your name wrong. What's a good way to substitute for eggs?
Substitute for eggs. In reality, there's no substitute for eggs in pasta dough, or at least this kind of pasta dough. You can make a flour and water style pasta dough, which generally would never be used for filling pasta outside of curliglionis, which are like the Sardinian pasta where they're kind of like weaved together, usually filled with potato. It's the only time you would see flour and water dough turned into a dough that is filling. And a lot of that has to do with the extensibility, the stretchiness of the dough, the texture. Most of the time you wouldn't roll a flour and water dough out thin enough and easily enough to turn it into filling. So unfortunately, there's not a great substitute for eggs. I would just make a different style of pasta if I can't eat eggs. If you don't want to put eggs in your filling though, and you just want to use potato, it's going to be delicious. I've done it before. It's great. The egg yolk thing in the center of the raviolo is kind of a nod to Catonia here in San Francisco. I learned how to make raviolos there while I was at Quince, which is like the sister restaurant next door. And it's something that if you've never had one, they're life-changing. And so I like to share that technique, that way of doing it. And if you're not into the egg yolk thing, I totally get it. I don't like to eat eggs on burgers or things like that, so just use the potatoes.
Yeah. And if you're talking about the dough, you could try to use some of the egg substitutes that you find.
Yeah, I've never tried it. You could try it.
You could try it.
Worst case scenario,
yeah.
you have a dough. It'll work as a dough of some sort. I don't know if it'll work for like ravioli, but you could definitely try it. Like there are tons of different egg substitutes in the store, and I'm sure a quick Google search might even save you the time of wasting egg substitutes if you did a little internet sleuthing.
Kathleen says my pasta is the opposite. Egg dough is harder than the green pasta.
So that's odd, considering that the only thing I could think of is that your eggs were different across the carton, which happens sometimes because chickens are not identical, so the eggs are sometimes different. Sometimes the yolks are bigger than the whites, or vice versa. But it shouldn't necessarily be that drastic of a difference between any of your doughs, whether you have the powder or not. It shouldn't be anything that we need to worry about or be concerned with, because once we start working with them, as long as they're all room temperature, we're going to get them all weaved and woven together with ease.
Ariane said, hi Joe, so happy to be here from Queens for the first time.
Welcome.
What's that cool machine the pot is on? Also beautiful plants.
Thank you for the plants. We're proud plant parents
we
here.
We love plants.
The machine, this is a Breville Polyscience is the brand. Control Freak is what it's called. It's an induction burner. It heats things up with a really powerful magnet, and it does a really great job of keeping them at that exact temperature. If you were a freak about controlling things, this is a really great induction burner, but it's an induction burner.
It's like the best. It's better than a stovetop.
I prefer it to a stovetop. I will use this over my stove. I set this on top of my stove on days when I'm not in the studio cooking. So I use this for everything.
Baba Ganoush 99 said, how soft is the dough supposed to be?
The dough should be pretty soft, and especially as it sits, it'll only get softer just from the gluten and egg white proteins interacting. And so it should be soft. There's not like a,
do you want to go?
Yeah, we could go like there's a tiny bit of a bounce back. It's soft, it's squishy. I can't really tell you how much pressure I'm putting on my finger, but it's soft. It's soft, it's rested.
It should not be...
It's room temp.
Yeah.
I pulled these out maybe 3 hours ago. So they've been sitting at room temperature for at least 3 hours. So they're very soft. They're not cold at all. And you'll notice the longer they sit out, the softer they become.
Mark says, I measured the flour and eggs by weight, but still had to add at least 2 ounces of water for the dough to come together. Is that really unusual? I'm in Colorado.
Colorado is the thing.
Yeah.
You're at a high altitude, everything is drier. And so, yes, definitely, you would have either needed more water, you may have needed one more whole egg. It's almost like with most probably baking recipes that if you do baking in Colorado, you need a higher hydration, you need a different bake time. You probably have noticed at this point in your life that water takes longer to come to a boil because the boiling point is different in Colorado because it is such a high altitude. So absolutely, it is not weird at all the fact that given where you are, just if you were in South America, very low altitude where it is very humid, you'd probably need less water or a little less egg because there's just natural humidity and you're at a low altitude, so there's no dryness in the air.
Leah Mundo says, hi, do you have any brand recommendations on vegetable powder for coloring? Rare Tea Cellar is a good one.
Rare Tea Cellar is a great one. That's also probably the most expensive you could find, but you get what you pay for when it comes to vegetable powders. The cheaper the vegetable powder, the lower quality vegetable they used in it, and so you sometimes will end up with a really muted color or a really muted taste, which depending on how you look at it, maybe you care, maybe you don't. There are also down in the bottom description here, there should be affiliate links, I think, to Amazon that you could buy powders. I linked to a bunch just to save everyone the effort.
So if you search those,
if you scroll, click the button.
You can either
here
buy it through or just on the internet.
Or on the internet,
yeah,
yes.
But they're all in there for links. That's it for questions.
That's it for questions. Well, Wonderful. Good questions. All very good questions.
For now.
So we'll set these aside. We're going to get started on our filling. A couple of things we need for our filling. We have our potatoes. They're warm. I chose a combination of potatoes here, Yukons and russets. You can use all russets here. You can use all Yukons. You can even use purple potatoes, red potatoes. At the end of the day, I chose the combination of potatoes because I like that combination of flavor that you get from Yukons, but the starchiness that you get from russets. So that's why I chose a combo. You don't necessarily need to use it, but I prefer it. I also like to always cook my potatoes when I'm working with fillings or I'm working with gnocchi in the oven. There's the other school of thought where you could boil them or you could steam them, but what you're essentially doing when you boil or steam something is you're adding moisture. When we're talking about something like pasta filling, you don't want a very moisture-driven filling because then that weeps out into the dough. It creates it sticky. It'll stick on the counter. It'll make the top of the dough sticky. It'll become very hard to pipe. And then you're also diluting the flavor of the filling with water or moisture. So instead, I prefer to do it in the oven and just cook it until they're completely fork, knife, poker, cake tester, tender, all the way through. The trick for whenever you're working with potatoes, and mine are probably still a little warm here, is ideally you're keeping them in the oven up until the moment that you're ready to use them and process them. So because potatoes are mostly made of starches and pectins, what ends up happening is once they're hot, they're all kind of like loose and all over the place. And you can manipulate them. You could mash them, you could puree them, you could break them all down, turn them into whatever you want. As long as the potato hasn't cooled yet, those pectins are all kind of free-flowing. They're free-moving. They're not going to set up on you. They're not going to turn gummy. But as soon as your potatoes cool, they're kind of set in that stage, whatever they're like. So if you were to take potatoes, let them cool down, and then try to puree them, then try to break them down, you're going to end up with potato paste or potato gum, something very similar to what you use to spackle your walls, and not very good for eating. It's going to have a really weird texture. So it's always important, and I try to stress this, as hard as it is to work with hot potatoes, you want to work with them while they're hot because they totally change once they've started to cool down. Sweet potatoes, not as much because there's less starch in sweet potatoes, more water and sugar, but especially when you're talking russets or Yukons, you want to work with them while they are still hot. So have all of the steps of your process ready to go before you even pull them out of the oven. We have here on the side some browned butter. I didn't show how to make this. We've made brown butter many times before. It is incredibly simple. You put the butter in a pot and just whisk until it's brown. What you're essentially doing is you're breaking that emulsion, which is the water and the milk fats. Once they separate, the water evaporates. All you're left is with butter, fat, and milk solids. All the milk solids float to the bottom of the pan. They get nice and toasty, and then they flavor everything up deliciously. If you've never ever worked with brown butter, oh my God, we're about to blow some minds.
It's so delicious.
It is so delicious. It is so nutty and aromatic. The cats start rubbing all over everything because it smells so good in the house. And you can use brown butter anywhere you use regular butter. You can put in mashed potatoes. If you've never had brown butter chocolate chip cookies, hold the phone because that's what you're going to do with your leftover brown butter is you're going to look up a brown butter cookie recipe and you're going to use your leftover brown butter for that because it is divine. But anyway, I digress. Brown butter, you could use it anywhere. It's great for pasta. It's great for potatoes. It's great for cookies. It's really great for anything you would put butter in. So I have my brown butter still warm. I haven't let it solidify completely because I want it to work into everything. I'm using a potato ricer today, which is kind of like this tool here that has holes on the bottom. They're not interchangeable. It's just one size. You put your potatoes in here and you squeeze it. They come out nice and chopped and fine, almost like puree. You can use a food mill, one of those things with the hand crank on the top that pushes potatoes through it. You could probably even get away with using a potato masher, like one of those avocado masher type tool things. That'll work. I wouldn't necessarily recommend a food processor in this case because you'll end up overworking the potatoes. You'll kind of stress out all of those starches and pectins and they'll get really kind of stretchy and stringy. So I prefer if you did it all by hand with a whisk or something like that, mash it all down. Last thing you need here, I need a towel here so it's just a little wet, is an ice bath. What is an ice bath? It's exactly what it sounds like. We got one big bowl on the bottom with ice cubes, one bowl on the top that we're going to be using to make our filling, and then to the bottom bowl, we have to turn it into a bath because in order for there to be an exchange of heat, this needs as much surface area and surface contact with the bottom bowl as possible. So by filling this up with just room temperature or cold water, your bowl is now sitting in an actual bath instead of just floating on top of the ice, sliding around. Trust me, it is a huge difference. Take the time and put some water in there.
We have a question about potatoes. Delilah says, accidentally peel the potatoes before going in the oven. Is that a big deal?
That's a good question. I've tried that before, and what I've noticed sometimes happens if you peel the potatoes before putting them in the oven is they actually form a second skin, and you still then need to peel that outer skin. Otherwise, you end up with all those kind of like weird outer chewy parts of the potato, of that second skin that's formed in your filling. Which, if it bothers you, yeah, then that you need to repeel them. If you don't mind having that little extra bit of texture, you can peel them in advance. I just always like to show, the way I would do it in a restaurant, or if I was like cooking a dinner for someone, is like this, because this skin protects the potatoes from drying out too much and forming that other layer that then you'd have to peel again. I like to use gloves to protect my hands from the heat of the potatoes. You can use a kitchen towel. That works just as well.
Jacqueline says, if using a food mill, what setting should we use? Small, medium, or large?
I would go at least medium, maybe small. Every food mill is going to be a little different. If you put it in small and you coast through and there are no issues, great. I would go with the small because it's going to have a smoother, creamier filling. If you put it in the small one and you notice it's not really going through, switch it to medium real quick. But you should be good with the small. That's it?
That's it.
Great. I'm going to use a little paring knife to peel the potatoes here. I think we can see nice up and close. I don't think we have to change the camera. But for peeling the potato, might as well, huh?
For a hot second.
Yeah, a hot second. We're going to get nice and close up here. So what I like to do is just hold the potatoes with my hands. I come underneath the bottom. I take the top off first. Then what you end up doing is you can just peel down the sides of the potatoes. And if you lose a little bit of potato, it's not the end of the world. But they should just peel right down off the sides of the potato. And you could scrape the knife if needed to kind of help peel what you're doing. But I like to go through, I peel all of my potatoes, then I'll rice all of my potatoes. Take the top off, and that kind of gives you a little bit of area to peel down the sides. If you've ever made gnocchi, this is the same exact process. It sounds weird saying that out loud because my cat's name is Gnocchi. If you've ever made gnocchi, I usually say gnocchi when I'm talking about my cat, not the pasta.
Pasta gnocchi.
Pasta gnocchi.
If you ever made pasta gnocchi,
then you would be very familiar with this process. So if you
been
don't have gloves, you can use a towel, like a clean kitchen towel. Works really well. You could hold the potato in your hand. You can use some paper towels crunched up to protect yourself from the heat of the potatoes. But like I said, you really want to work quickly and efficiently, keeping the potato as hot as you can before you break it down. Once we've breaking it down, either through the mill, the ricer, whatever it is, if it starts to cool, that's great. That's why we're doing it right here into our ice bath. So that way we can use the filling right away. If you don't plan on using this filling right away and you have other things to do, or you're making this in advance, which you could totally do. You can make this a day or two, maybe even 3 in advance. And you can put it in piping bags and you can let it cool naturally. And that'll work just as well. But because I want to use it right away, I'm going to use this ice bath here to chill everything down.
I think everyone's cooking along today, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Oh, don't forget to take some photos and tag me as we're doing this. I love seeing what everyone's doing.
It's really inspiring.
It's inspiring for me. I really like to see everyone's process, everyone having fun cooking along. So, and there's that age-old saying that if you don't take a photo before you eat it, it doesn't taste as good. And obviously we want this to taste as good as possible. So everyone, please don't forget to take photos. Find me on Instagram at chef.joe.sasto and tag me because I want to see what you're doing. And I appreciate you all being here. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, I'll only remind you 5 more times.
He won't, I promise.
I'm coming up on, let's see, I have 2 more potatoes to go. If your potato starts to crumble in your hands, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Just got these 2 little ones left. You can kind of see if your potatoes were sitting on the tray, there's like a hotter spot here. that kind of will end up forming all the way around your potato if you were to peel this and then bake it, which isn't the worst thing, but it does add a texture to your filling. So I don't recommend it, but there's always more than one way to do something. And if you think it's easier to peel these before and you don't mind having that little bit of texture, I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah. To each their own.
To each their own. All right, coming up on the last one here. Fantastic. The potato peels, you can save them. It's one thing you could do with them is you could toss them with a little bit of olive oil, put them back on a tray and pop them in the oven. A little bit of salt, black pepper. You'll have these like little crispy potato skins that work wonderfully as a snack while you're making all of this pasta. You can make a stock out of them or toss them into soup. Really makes a nice like roasted potato soup flavor. Or you could compost them and help save the planet. One or the other. We're gonna go right here into our food mill. No, potato ricer. No food mill today. You see it, or a food mill if that's what you have. But you can see how wonderful and easily this thing works. You just put the potatoes in. They pop right down the bottom. This is actually a new addition to my kitchen. I have not always had one of these, and I've only used a food mill. And I just think this is so much quicker and easier than a food mill. Food mills are great, don't get me wrong. If you have one, I use it all the time. It has plenty of uses, from like pureeing tomatoes to veggies. I like using my food mill, especially like if I'm doing braised meat, like short rib or roast pork or something like that. And I take all of the mirepoix that I was braising with, and I put it in the food mill separate from the meat and the jus. You end up with like this really awesome kind of like ground veggie mix you could add back to your sauce or add back to your meat to serve with the meal. Maybe you guys already do that. Maybe you don't. Now you just learned something new. A little 2-for-1 today.
Now you know.
Every time. That's going to be your new catchphrase.
What?
Now you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Would the potato skins make a good stock for making risotto? Chris and Michaela asked.
Yes, that'd be freaking awesome. I've used it as a stock to glaze gnocchi with. I've used it as a stock for making soup with. I've never used it as a stock for risotto, but that sounds like a really awesome flavor combination. Like a roasted potato risotto, but no potatoes in it, just using the potato stock. Mm-hmm. I feel like it would go really well with like a shellfish kind of risotto. And on my last one here, use your muscles. Get it all the way through. There we go. Potatoes have started to cool, so we're in a really good spot. They're in the bowl here. We can remove our gloves. Our hands are clean. That's another reason I like using the gloves. Keeps your hands really clean. You can just pass off your tray to your partner in the room for dishes, and we're ready to go. So now, next, we have our ice bath. We have our potato mix. As long as your potatoes have cooled slightly and are not still piping hot, you go ahead with all of your creme fraiche. If you can't find creme fraiche, sour cream works really well. If you can't find sour cream, you'd use yogurt. Mascarpone's a great substitute here as well. I like adding just this extra bit of dairy and creaminess. It's a nice change up from using ricotta. It pairs well with the potatoes. Someone pointed out to me, which I didn't even realize, it's very similar to a pierogi filling, which, I mean, just I guess goes to show how much cuisines are linked throughout the world without even realizing it. But I like that kind of like tangy creaminess opposed to using ricotta in here to kind of switch it up. Now I'm going to add my parm. And I like to get my salt in here as well before I've done any mixing, because that salt's going to take a bit to get incorporated into the potatoes. I like using Diamond Crystal kosher salt. If you're not familiar with that, definitely seek it out. For me, it is the easiest salt to season with. It's the most consistent. Morton's is a little saltier than salt because of their grain sizes. And if you're still using iodized or table shaker or any of those other salts, I encourage you, because you're here, you're cooking, so obviously you care about cooking in some capacity, to seek out another variety of salt. You'll find, I think, you'll season and enjoy food and enjoy cooking much more easily, and have it more available to you by using a different variety of salt. So I'm going to start by just mixing in those two ingredients, getting them incorporated.
How much of the cream did you add?
You'd have to, I want to say it's a quarter cup. I believe it's a quarter cup, if I remember the recipe correctly, off the top of my head. Am I correct? Bella's checking. I think it's a quarter cup.
I'm looking right now. The recipe link is right there in the...
Yeah, the recipe link's the first thing in the YouTube thing below us, but Bella's going to check for us. Thank you, Bella.
You're welcome.
Just in case.
Oh, Luke says never mind.
Luke says never mind, but Bella's going to keep looking.
I'm going to check just in case.
Just to see if I'm right.
1/4 cup creme fraiche.
1/4 cup. Beautiful. All right, so now our brown butter. I have all of my brown butter here. I'm going to add about half of it. Save the other half for the topping to my ravioli. You could add more, you could add less. Brown butter is one of those things you can really do to taste. Some people love it. They want to go over the top, make it extra buttery, extra delicious. I applaud you. Other people are a little kind of like brown butter. It's an intense, unique flavor, and so maybe you want the potatoes to shine a little more. You want that cheesiness more so than the butter, so you can hold it back. What I do recommend you do whenever you're using brown butter is you give it a really nice stir to get all of those brown bits from the bottom of the pan evenly mixed up into your liquid. If you don't stir it, you're going to end up pulling off clarified brown butter, which is great, just way less flavorful. And you want the flavor of all those brown butter solids, is what they're called. They're those caramelized milk solids down on the bottom of the pan. So give that all a really good stir.
Jacqueline wants to know, or if you were to choose between buttercream and yogurt, which one would be better?
Butter, cream, and yogurt. I could only have one.
Or you can do both.
I would do creme fraiche and butter.
Creme fraiche and butter.
Creme fraiche and butter would be my number one choice. If I could only choose one of those three, I would do butter.
Butter, cream, and yogurt?
Butter, cream, or yogurt.
Yeah, which one?
If I could only do one, it would be butter.
Okay.
If you're making me choose, I mean, what would you? Now I want to know. Who asked that? What would you choose? Now I want to know your choice.
Well, the tanginess could be, yeah.
If you could only do yogurt, but I really just love butter. So I'm going to go about half my butter into my potatoes. Try not to dribble down the side of your pan, but that's what paper towels are for. Just so then you don't put down your pot and make a mess on your table. And then we're just going to fold all of this in together. I'm actually going to lift it out of the bowl now that it has chilled slightly, just to make it easier to mix. It's very hard to mix something in an ice bath because everything kind of like sloshes around. Obviously we don't want any sloshy. But you'll notice now by having that room temperature melted butter, you have your semi-room temperature potatoes, you have your cold cheeses. This is going to chill very quickly. We could go in and out of the ice bath in order to get this to the point where we could put it into a piping bag to make our filling.
Carl wants to know, is mascarpone a better substitute for creme fraiche than sour cream?
I think sour cream is a better substitute for creme fraiche. They're more similar. Creme fraiche is like a cultured cream. Sour cream is a sour cream. I think at the end of the day, one is like French and one is more American or English, probably, from the UK originally, perhaps. But I love the flavor and texture of creme fraiche the most. It's like one of my favorite soured cream ingredients, but it's also harder to find. So sour cream makes a great substitute for creme fraiche. Yogurt makes a great substitute that's healthier for both of those. Mascarpone is like a thickened cultured cream without any of that tang. So that would work really well if like you're into the idea of adding a dairy component, but you don't want something very tangy. So mascarpone would be a great sub for that. And by the way, everyone notice I'm saying mascarpone, not marcarpone, because the R is at the end of the word, not at the beginning. So if you catch your friends saying mascarpone, go tisk tisk. It's mascarpone. Okay.
Carl said it right.
Thank you. Carl said it right.
Lauren wants to know, mine is a lot less brown than that. How long did you cook it for?
So that's a great observation and point out there. There are various stages of brown butter, and a lot of it just has to do with personal preference or what you're maybe going for. I cooked mine until it came to a brown color. I didn't time it, and you can't necessarily time it because depending on the temperature of your stove and the size of your pan and the power of your stove, it's going to be a different time every single time. Every butter has a different amount of water content in it depending on the brand. And the time it takes for that water to evaporate will determine then how quickly it starts to brown. So if you have a butter with very little water in it, it's going to brown much more quickly than a butter with lots of water in it. So don't pay attention to the time necessarily. Just do it by eyesight and the way it looks. If you have a hazelnut colored brown butter, it's just going to be much more mild and nutty in flavor. You could throw it back on the stove and cook it a little longer, or you just use it as that hazelnut brown butter. The French call it beurre noisette. French help over here.
Just go ahead. It's okay.
Beurre noisette. And so that's thank you for making fun of me instead of helping.
You're half French too.
That is a lighter version of brown butter versus the darker version, which I'm not even going to try to pronounce, which has much more of that like bitter kind of robust, buttery, dark chocolate kind of flavor, which is still great in its own sense. But once again, one of those things that like I like it, it's not for everyone. So cook it to your own personal tastes.
Allison says, I don't have a ricer, but my cheese grater is seemingly working well. We'll see though.
Oh, cheese grater is a great call. I always recommend a cheese grater for people trying to make gnocchi without a ricer. So a cheese grater would work for you.
And then Paul says, adding cream to yogurt works well. Excellent. Elizabeth said, did we already add the Parm cheese?
We added the Parm.
Yes.
We added the Parm when we added the salt.
Mm-hmm. Cleo says, can't you mix equal parts sour cream and table cream to make creme fraiche?
You could, I'm sure. But then again, it's like maybe you don't have table cream. I mean, yes, there's more than one made to make everything. Like you can make your own buttermilk, or you could just buy it. So if you have an alternative and you want to drop it in the chat room, thank you. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I've never made my own creme fraiche like that. I have made my own creme fraiche by culturing cream with a culture and leaving it out at room temperature. But in this case, you could buy it, or you just season up cream, you use sour cream.
Chef,
Let's not get caught up on the creme fraiche.
Chef, did you add black pepper yet?
I have not added black pepper yet. If you would like to add black pepper, by all means, go crazy with it. I just added a little more salt to mine. I like the cheesiness. I like the brown butteriness. I am going to get it back here in the ice bath to cool down for a second before I put it into my piping bag. I'm going to grab a towel here. Yes, our black pepper. We're going to be done with this. How's everyone else's filling coming together? They feel good about it? Hopefully no one's nervous. Let's talk it through if anyone's nervous.
Cassandra said it tastes delicious.
Tastes delicious. Thank you, Cassandra. Shout out to Cassandra for enjoying her filling.
And then how much black pepper did you add, Chef?
That was exactly 23 turns of black pepper. If you want to go a little more and you like black pepper, great. If 23 turns is a little too high for you, I'd start with maybe 10, maybe 5. I don't know. But add black pepper to taste. To taste. It's one of those things that people forget their palate is a muscle. And it's easy to get caught up on a recipe and thinking of a recipe as like this thing written in stone that can never change. But when in fact, the recipe should be looked at as a roadmap. Think of it as like, I've used this analogy before, but if you're new here and you haven't heard it yet, I really like this analogy. The recipe is a roadmap. It's like the GPS system when you get in the car. It'll tell you how to get there, but you still need to drive the car. Unless you have a Tesla, it's not autonomous. You need to pay attention. You need to stop it from going down a one-way street, and you need to sometimes avoid some traffic. So you as the cook in the kitchen need to treat a recipe the same way. If you really like black pepper or you hate it, no one's forcing you to put black pepper into a recipe or limiting how much black pepper you can put in there. So think of it like that. The brown butter is almost the same way. I used about half of it in here. If you taste it and you're like, I wish there was more butter in here, I give you the authority to be your own chef, your own cook in the kitchen, and add all of the butter and go crazy. And it's going to be delicious, and you're going to love it, and you're going to like it even more because you went outside of the box, you got out of your comfort zone, and you did something new and different. And I really want people to kind of get that approach when it comes to cooking and not think of it as something that it needs to be this particular way. Because then that's where you start to get stressed out. It's where you start to like lose balance and things become way too overcomplicated where we're cooking at the end of the day. We're having fun. We're making food. And I hope that sentiment translates.
Yeah. Like, for example, you tried a pizza recipe from a chef in Philadelphia, and it didn't turn out the same way because it's a different environment.
Here.
Yeah, here. So
Yes.
it's a different, it might be a different recipe, but it'll get you there.
Recipes will get you there, but you still need to cook. So I got a nice cool filling here. I have my piping bag. If you don't have a piping bag, feel free to use a zip top bag and just cut the corner off. If you are using a zip top bag or even using a piping bag, something that helps is to fold down the top of the bag over itself. So then that way you're placing, sorry it's loud. So that way you're placing the filling into the bottom of the bag, then getting it all on the outside, and anything you get on the bag then becomes the inside, which actually works really well. Don't overfill it either. Don't be afraid to use multiple bags. You don't need to fill this to the top in one bag, otherwise you're gonna have a really hard time piping it. If you don't have a piping bag or you don't have a zip top bag, you could use a spoon and spoon this onto the raviolis. It's gonna be a little more rustic, but it's gonna work. So let's come in here with our potato filling. If you wanted to make this in advance, I would just let this come to room temperature before using it, so that way it becomes easy to pipe. The butter is going to solidify and it's going to get like rock hard in the fridge, which is totally fine. But you definitely want to let it temper a bit before you get into it. Otherwise, you may run into the problem where you're not able to pipe it because the butter is still solid. So, potato filling, piping bag. I only need one bag for now. I'm not going to make that much at this moment.
Someone said they added 2 times the cheese. Yes.
Twice the cheese. I love it.
Yeah.
I applaud you. Well done.
That's what I would have done.
Yeah, why not? In my world, more cheese is more better. So if you think, hey, I want that much cheese too, go for it. Cheese is delicious. I've tied up the top of my piping bag. Something that's I've seen other people do that work really well is like you use a hair tie, throw that like triple knot thing over it, and that holds this really tight. You can use a piece of butcher's twine. You can tie this over itself, and it'll hold pretty well just by kind of folding the plastic into itself. You can use tape or something like that. I've even gone as far as seeing people like, if you have plastic wrap around, I hate to recommend things with plastic wrap, so we need to stop using as much plastic wrap. But if you turn the plastic wrap into a rope, you can then use that crinkled up rope to tie the top of your bag if you're in a pinch. But like I said, we all need to do our part to save the world, right? All right, butter is done. Keep that warm on the side. We're going to infuse it with a little bit of herb later before we put it on top of our ravioli. We're done with our hot pads for the moment. And now let's get ourselves situated for pasta making, yes?
Yes, let's do it.
All right, I'm just going to wipe down any residual water that accidentally got on my pasta board from my water bath, but that's okay.
And I think this is a good transition into talking about the surface.
Yeah, let's talk about the surface. That's a great transition. So I am making pasta on wood. This is live wood. What I mean by live, it is unsealed. So it is porous, it is open. There is surface contact here between the dough and whatever's happening below it at the wood. If you're making pasta on your countertop, that is tile, granite, marble, something that is sealed, you're going to notice that your dough is going to stick to it much easier. You're going to need more flour, which is not the end of the world, just something to consider. This board was about 20 bucks at the hardware store. All I did was just take a light sanding to it by hand, and I have a pasta board that stands up on the wall whenever I'm not done with it, and I plop it down out of the closet when I need it. You can find even smaller pieces of wood. Worst case scenario, if you have a cutting board, I like to sheet my dough and then do all of my cutting and shaping on the cutting board, because that bit of live wood, this porous nature, actually has like these micro abrasions. So if you look at this under a microscope and you look at a piece of tile under a microscope, tile's gonna be super smooth. The wood's gonna have all of these like abrasions. Those abrasions stop the dough from sticking down. And you'll find it'll get really annoying when you're making lots of pasta, even on stainless steel. Like if you work in a restaurant and you're trying to make pasta on a stainless steel surface, it's a pain in the butt. So consider just pulling out a cutting board. rolling on stainless steel and then doing all of your cutting and shaping on the cutting board in small batches, it's going to make all the difference. Even if you don't have a wood cutting board and it's like one of those like rough plastic cutting boards, that's even going to help and make your life easier. And then plus, when you're spraying and moisturizing your surface of your dough, water has a tendency to evaporate and be absorbed into wood. If you just sprayed water onto your tile, it's not going to go anywhere. So you're going to end up with like these puddles of wetness that your dough can stick to, and it becomes really annoying. So I know that was a very long-winded way of saying the surface matters on what you're making pasta on. We've talked about it before in other classes, but I always like to touch base on that because it is an important aspect, and sometimes you're not doing anything wrong. You're doing everything right, and just your surface is wrong, and it makes you feel like you're messing things up or your pasta dough isn't right, when really consider what you're working on. So we got that out of the way. That's done. Now we have our pasta making mise en place, things we need. We need a rolling pin or a wine bottle. Even if you have a machine, we always start with a rolling pin. So get that out if you don't already. I have a rotolo, which is like a cutting tool. It's almost like a pizza cutter, a little smaller. A pizza cutter would work great for this. You need something like that. A knife would work just as well. I like to have a bench scraper out. This is great for picking up pasta, moving things around, getting excess dough or flour off of the table. If you don't have a bench scraper, you can use a knife as well, or just like a brush or a towel, something to kind of like help control where all the flour is.
Like a cleaver, like a big knife.
Yeah, a cleaver would work, or even like a smaller knife, like one of these like Nikiris that are like, you could kind of turn into a scraper of sorts. And last but not least, not even last, but definitely by not least, is a water spray bottle. One of my favorite pasta tools. Yes, this is a pasta tool. I never leave home without it. Well, I leave home, but I never go to work without it. I have a small version of this. I actually keep it in my knife roll because that's how valuable I feel like a water spray bottle is. It's not only great for like if you're trying to keep herbs or salads or greens fresh, but it's for moistening the surface of your dough before you seal any of your raviolis or pastas. You never see it done in videos or anything like that online, but it is the best way to add moisture to your dough when needed. Never ever egg wash, ever. Never ever egg wash. I'll say it 100,000 times. The reason being, not just because it's a weird thing to do, but because egg souffles when it cooks. So if you add egg wash to pasta dough, it's going to add texture and thickness and souffling to that part of the pasta that you put egg on, which is one thing, not good. And then second of all, it's messy. So even if you're like super gentle and careful painting on your egg wash, it's going to get on your fingers. It's going to get on the surface you're working on. And water, like I said, evaporates. Egg wash does not. So never ever egg wash to seal your pasta.
Yeah, if you have the right hydration of the dough, you don't need
You need very minimal spray.
Yeah.
But if you don't have one, find the internet. The internet is a valuable resource.
But never ever egg wash.
Never ever egg wash.
Great.
Well, yes.
No, yeah.
Okay.
I was gonna say those.
Yeah. Optionally, I like to use cookie cutters for raviolis. These are nylon ring mold cookie cutters. They come in all different shapes, they come in all different sizes. There are two varieties. There are these fluted versions that have like all these kind of like flutes on the side, and then I don't even see them down here. They're somewhere on my shelf, but they're the non-fluted versions that are just all flat at the bottom like a traditional cookie cutter. What I really like about these, and you'll see when we get into the raviolos, is there's a sharp end down at the bottom and there's a flat end at the top that won't do any cutting, and we use both sides of it when we're making raviolis. You'll see that soon. I also really highly prefer these nylon. It's made of nylon. It kind of looks like plastic. It's a type of plastic. And I like these because they're more sturdy than metal. People are like, oh, metal must be really great. What ends up happening is metal cookie cutters bend incredibly easy. So you may be trying to use it, all of a sudden that little fine edge becomes a crooked edge, and now all of a sudden your raviolis have like a swoosh or a little jiggle on the end of it, which doesn't really look nice. And so metal cutters get messed up over time. Not even over time. They get messed up almost after the first use. These I've had for years and years and years, and nothing's ever happened to them.
And then if you don't have those, can you use a mug?
You can use a mug. You can use a glass. You can use a mason jar. Or you could just use your hands, and that works just as well. I'm just talking about things I like to have around. So that's one thing. I usually like to keep some sort of vessel either for my dough trim that I don't want to use again, or for my eggshells, or for paper towels, or whatever it is. So that way you're not just like working in a big messy area and you have like stuff piling up all over the place. That's going to be your little waste receptacle, so you don't need to run over to the trash can wherever that may be in your kitchen. Might be not where you're working, and then that way you have a nice little bowl there to keep everything in. If you are doing the egg version, filling today, I like to have 2 separate bowls, one for my eggs to hold and one for separating the yolks out. Optional if you plan on going this route, but it definitely helps to have a small bowl, so that way you're not doing the little egg toss back and forth cup sort of thing. I don't know who makes those. I just saw that. I think it's Alltech. I know I got them off of Amazon. Chef's rubber?
It says Fat Daddy-O's.
Oh, perfect. Fat Daddy-O's. What a brand name.
Whoa. That's weird.
Bella doesn't believe it. I think it might be Fat Daddy-O's. But they're really great. I think I might have put a link to them in the bottom under my links.
Oh, maybe. Oh, yes, this is the thing. Fat Daddy-O's.
Fat Daddy-O's. I think the link's down low.
Nylon cutters.
If they didn't put the link there, you can find them on the internet.
Yeah.
Bella's checking. Now I want to know. Did I put them?
No.
No.
No, I don't think so.
Dang. Missed opportunity.
That's okay.
That's all right. Really great tool. And I think that's it. I think we have everything else we need. Obviously, we have a little bit of bench flour here just for dusting as needed. Probably don't need a lot of that, but it's nice to have around. Let's get started. I'm going to start with... Oh, that's not it. I'm sorry. I just thought of one more thing I like to have, just so nobody's running around. I like to use zip top bags. Reusable. I keep the same bags around for weeks and weeks because they don't get dirty, they don't go bad, and you're reusing them. But these are going to be like our protectors for any dough that we're not working with. And that helps the dough from drying out, from getting crackly, from getting unusable, essentially. So this will be kind of like my safe zone for my dough when I'm not working with it that I keep here on the side of my station. So we have our first piece of dough. I'm going to start with my yellow dough. You can start with your whatever color you have. Usually I start on that bigger piece first. Yes.
Water on the stove?
If you want to put water on the stove, you can. We don't need it yet. Mine water's not even on.
Sounds good.
Water comes to a boil very fast. We don't need a lot of water today. It's a different style of ravioli, but thank you. Let's see here. So pulling the plastic off. If you notice that the dough is sticking to your wrap, that's okay. That's just something to be mindful of, that like, hey, next time I do this, I put a little too much liquid. Maybe I didn't need that extra spray of water. Maybe I could have used a touch more flour. Just something to mentally take a note of. But if you need to peel the dough away from the plastic, just know, hey, I've made it a little too wet. It's going to be okay. So plastic will save. Over here to the side, I'll use that for my dough trim to keep it nice and safe. Now what we have is this round here, right? A round is great, but if we try to roll around into the machine, what's going to end up happening is we're going to get a very long gator tail, this elongated kind of like oval shape, which is not very fun to work with. It's really annoying and gets in the way. So instead, don't be afraid to manipulate your dough. It's pasta dough. It's made to be manipulated. We're going to start with a little bit of flour.
Is your bench flour double O?
Bench flour is double O, but it can be all-purpose. It can be whatever you have, not semolina. Double O or all-purpose. Should be a finely ground flour for your bench flour. Let's take a moment to talk about flouring, shall we? So this is important, and I think a lot of people don't realize it, but it's something I want everybody to work on because it's important to me, and it makes a huge difference. And it's a skill that's often overlooked, is the way to flour. So naturally, I've seen it 1,000 times, people when they put flour on their pasta dough, they come in and they have their hand a couple of inches from the dough and they sprinkle it on and they put flour on like this. Worse, they use the scooper and they try to dust flour on like this. Both of those, no. We don't want to be doing that for a number of reasons. We're adding way too much flour. It's not evenly dispersed and you end up with all these big clumps and you end up with too much flour on your dough. This is all what we want to avoid. Instead, what we should be doing is taking the flour, we should be holding it up high, up here, not down in front. And I don't like to pinch this way. I turn my hand inverted and I turn it into one of these like almost powdered sugar shakers or flour sifters. and I shake my hand, and I let the flour fall ever so gently. And I'll do it a little bit closer here so you can see. Let the flour fall ever so gently on the surface of everything. And then that way you have this very thin veil of flour versus this very thick veil of flour. And there's a huge difference when you start rolling out your dough, and you'll end up over incorporating flour. It's just going to get in the way. It's going to make a mess on your surface, and it's going to be way more than you need. So we could all practice and work on just the flouring technique that we're using. And that's going to lead to a much better and easier to work with pasta dough. So this is out of the way. We're done. Bad flour. We don't need that. So now we have back to our ball. Tiny bit of flour on the top and bottom. And we're going to slowly shape this into a rectangle, like I was saying. We want to work in geometric patterns. So don't be afraid to start shaping this into a rectangle with just your hands. Dough is meant to be manipulated. People often get very afraid to come in here thinking they have to use a rolling pin or they have to use a machine, when your hands are often your best tool for doing things. And don't be afraid to kind of like pull the corners, pull the edges. Get this all kind of started out. So now what we're working with here is a rectangle instead of a circle. So now when we put a rectangle into the machine, what we're going to get out is a long rectangle. If we put a circle into the machine, we're going to end up with a long circle, which is very hard to work with. Next, no matter what kind of machine you have, unless you're working in a restaurant and you have like one of those really awesome Ninas or like Arcobaleno or something like that, you're going to need to use a rolling pin. That's because the machine can only do so much work. You need to get it started. You need to do a little bit of help from the machine. So we're going to use our rolling pin to get our dough stretched so our dough becomes as thick as our thickest setting of the machine. We can't have our dough thicker than the thickest setting. How we're going to do that is I like to focus on the center mass of the dough. So by kind of making a mark there in the center and pressing upwards and using just an upward pressure instead of a forward and backwards pressure. Don't think of this like pie dough where you just kind of go like this on it to get it spread out. Because it's not the same style of dough, you don't use the same technique. Instead, starting in the center, using just an upward pressure and then kind of gently bringing your hands back in the center and creating an upward pressure, and then you spin the dough around and you can kind of see where the center is. This is thin, this is thick. Now we'll go this way and we'll start in the center and bring the dough upwards using just the weight of our arms and our hands, pressing only upward. And the reason why we do this versus going back and forth is because we're controlling where the dough mass is going. We have so much more control. We're only putting pressure in this direction. We're keeping track of where the majority of the dough is. It's getting moved evenly in each direction instead of some of it going over here, some of it going over here, some going over there, and back and forth, and it just kind of gets out of control. This way, it's very much controlled. You are in control, and you're telling the dough exactly where it needs to go. So now we have a larger oval, but look what's happening. It's slowly turning back into an oval. It's pasta dough. Don't be afraid to manipulate it. Come in here on the edges, give yourself a little tug, and help kind of like fan these sides out. Now we end up with a piece of dough that is much wider and a rectangle. Exactly what we want to be working with. Don't worry now at this point if your dough is wider than your machine, because I'll show you exactly what you're going to do. And I know this will still fit into my machine, but I'm going to take the little steps with all of you because it's important that mine looks like yours.
Lauren says mine is shrinking a lot more. What might be happening?
Lauren, your dough might not be rested or it might not be room temperature. So without knowing if your dough is pulling back on you, it didn't rest enough. And so the gluten is still stressed out and it's just kind of shrinking back in on itself. Versus a nice relaxed dough shouldn't have any problem getting rolled out. Or it's cold and it's doing the same thing. I don't know. I can't feel it. But try either one of those. If you put a little piece of plastic over it or just let it set aside. Give it another hour or so, because I don't know how long you rested it already. You should be good to go. Cool. Everyone else feel good at this point? I feel great. So we have our nice big piece of dough, right? Wonderful. This is not going to fit into your machine. Using the KitchenAid attachment, using the Atlas hand crank, whatever it is, I know this won't fit. So instead what we're going to do is take our rotolo, we're going to come right up the center of the dough, and we're going to end up with now 2 strips of dough. One of the strips we're going to dust ever so lightly. We're going to do a little fold on it, and it's going to go into our bag. And that way it's not going to dry out. We're not dealing with a double wide piece of dough. And then we can come back to this later. This is ready to use when we're ready for it. Now this half of dough can go right into our machine. We're ready to dive in. We don't need to use the rolling pin anymore. It's as thin as the thickest setting of our machine, and our machine is ready to take it. Yes?
Paul says, can you really tell if a pasta is made only with a roller versus a machine?
Absolutely not. Anyone who says they can, I think they are full of it. They're full of it.
Well, it depends if you do it properly.
If you do it properly. And like it all has to come down to technique. So I haven't done a story on it, but I've done it in real life and just tested it myself because I had to know the answer to that as well. And if you treat the dough properly, you let it cure slightly, you kneaded it well, you use the machine right, and you roll it out, you'll have the same exact final dough as using a mozzarella and rolling it out by hand. I've seen if you want to go deep onto like Familia Baldassarre's Instagram, he saved a highlight I think a long time ago where he disproved that entire myth, and he did 2 doughs side by side, one rolled by hand with the mozzarella, one rolled with the machine, took like close-up photos of everything side by side, showed that you could still get texture on your dough, that you still get all these nice beautiful little air bubbles in your dough, all of the things that they say you can only get with a mozzarella. Now again, if you want to be a purist and only use mozzarella, like that's great, that's awesome. It's an artisan craft. It is incredibly hard to do, and it's not for everyone, and you're definitely like a keeper of a lost art in that respect. But no, I don't think if you use your machine correctly and you use the right technique when you're rolling it out, you should not be able to tell the difference. That's my take on it.
Ken says, what's the maximum rest time at room temp?
Maximum rest time at room temp? I mean, if you're going to eat it all today, I've left dough out for hours, knowing that I was going to use it all that night and it wasn't going to go back in the fridge, and it was like fresh pasta to be enjoyed that day. Like I probably left it at room temperature for maybe 6 hours, rolled it out, cooked it right away, ready to go, and you're fine. Especially, you're using fresh eggs, you're using nice flour, you're not contaminating anything, you're working in a clean environment. So there's like obviously all those little factors you want to pay attention to. But maybe you're going to still plan on using it later. I would say 4 hours maybe at the most. Just because then you're going to refrigerate it, or maybe plan your schedule accordingly.
This next question is a good segue into machines and the difference between them all. Luke says, which setting are we going to on the machine? All the way to 6?
So great. We're about to jump into the machines, and we'll talk all about it. We'll take a moment. Don't let your dough dry out while I'm standing here talking about the machine. If you need to put the other piece in the bag because you're in Colorado or you're somewhere where it's really dry and you see your dough already starting to crack, set it aside while I talk about this, because this is important. And everybody gets caught up on this, and it's one thing that a lot of people have a hard time understanding. The numbers on your machine are not universal. There's no rule book for these numbers. Those numbers are there. It's a modern implementation. If you look at very old pasta machines, there are no numbers. They're just little notches. And the notches are just there so you know as a pasta maker in your home, or I know as a pasta maker in my home, that when I use my machine, I can be consistent in my turning of the knob, and I'm turning it the same amount in the same increment the entire time. And I'm stopping at the same increment when I'm making raviolis every single day, all day long. My machine is different than your machine. Your machine is different than someone else's machine. Every brand is different, and even within that same brand, and KitchenAid is a great example of this, and I don't know why they did this, but at some point, 3 different times, they changed the numbering system on their KitchenAid attachments. So I have a very old KitchenAid attachment, and I think mine goes from like 0 being the widest and 10 being the thinnest. Some other people's go from 6 being the widest and 1 being the thinnest. I've seen other KitchenAids that go from 8 to 0. And so they're just totally arbitrary numbers that are there for you to keep notes of and to keep track of in terms of what you like in your pasta. So every dough recipe is different. Every machine's different. A recipe that has more eggs or whole eggs is going to souffle slightly when it cooks and puff up. And so you may need to roll it thinner. Versus a recipe that uses only yolks is not going to souffle and puff as much as it cooks. So you could probably roll it a little thicker. All of that being said, we're always going to start on the widest setting. Maybe that's a 10 for you, or maybe that's a 0. It's hard to say. And then you're going to work one step at a time, bringing it all the way down. We're not going to go to whatever the thinnest is. I've only maybe once ever used the thinnest setting on a pasta machine, and it was probably to make crackers. Because usually the thinnest is just way too thin. It's like there is an option, but rarely will you ever do pasta that thin. On my machine, I like the second from the thinnest. On the KitchenAid, I like the third from the thinnest. But that's my KitchenAid. That's a very old model. So what I recommend is starting at third from the thinnest. You could always cut off a small little piece, boil it in some water, taste it. Is it really chewy? Is it really thick? Or is it like a nice sheet of lasagna or a piece of pappardelle or something like that? And you're like, oh, this is perfect. I know third to the thinnest is exactly what I like for my machine. If you're not sure, then roll a little piece to second from the thinnest and then cook them side by side. Then you taste them. You're like, oh, this one's way better. I love this. And that's part of being a cook, is tasting things and figuring out what you like. So unfortunately, if you signed up for this class hoping to get a magic rule book of numbers and how to use your machine, it doesn't exist. And anyone that tells you that is lying to you, because KitchenAid's a perfect example that every machine is going to be a little different and there's no universal numbers. So instead, think of it as a guide for you. And I have the same thing. So like if you have this Imperia restaurant, the same model, the same year mine was made, I have like a little notebook where I keep track of all of the numbers and the different shapes and the different fillings. And sometimes you want a thick pasta filling, a thick pasta dough to go with a certain filling with a ravioli. And then other times you want a really thin pasta dough to go with a different type of filling for the same shape of ravioli. So then you're just kind of opening up another entire exponential world of possibilities, huh? An entire world of possibilities when it comes to the numbers. And I know maybe I just spent way too much time talking about that, and I'm sorry if you're trying to hurry along, but it's important for everyone to understand that.
Especially if you haven't taken a class before. Max said, is it better to use whole eggs or just yolks to make pasta, or a combination of both?
Like I talked about in the beginning, if you missed the beginning, first like minute or two of the class, I talked all about my dough, the one of the whole eggs versus just yolks. I like just yolks for most part. Sometimes I use all whole eggs, but that's another one of those personal preferences.
Okay.
Great. So we're going into the machine. We're good. We're great. We're going to go on the widest setting. Whether you're using a hand crank, whether you're using the KitchenAid. If you're using the KitchenAid, something to keep track of here. Hold on, let me give you a little headspace here. If you're using the KitchenAid, something to keep track of is you want it on at least a speed 3 or 4. You never want to try to go speed 1 or 2 because the gears are not powerful enough to pull your dough through the sheeter, and you're going to end up stressing out the machine and stressing out the dough. I know speed 3 or 4 seems very fast and things happen. You're like, oh my gosh, it makes a loud noise and what's happening? But it's okay. You'll get used to it. It's going to be better for the dough. It's going to be better for the machine. It's going to be better for sheeting. If you're using a hand crank, go as fast as you'd like. Using a machine like this, there's no speed choice. Something to keep in mind. We're rolling. We've talked about this before, but the biggest mistake everybody makes when they're rolling pasta dough is they're paying attention to what's happening as the dough comes out. Everybody's like just kind of putting the dough in, watching down here, trying to control as the dough comes out. They're focused on the wrong thing. Instead, what you should be focused on is the area up here, the top part of the machine, how the dough is going in. Are you creating tension? Are you guiding the dough into the machine? Are you making sure that it's not getting bunched up, that it's not going to one side, that it's not kind of like falling onto itself? All of that makes a difference, and as long as you're paying attention to what's going in, nothing bad's going to happen down here at the bottom. So if you're by yourself, you have a hand crank, you only have one hand, your focus should be back here cranking, not down here pulling. That makes sense? I hope. Yes? Everybody cheers. Hooray! And we're going to put our dough into the machine, paying attention to the back end, make sure I'm on the widest setting, letting the dough go right into the machine. I'm cranking. I'm turning. We're going. And now we have our first piece coming out of the machine. We're going to lower this by 1 notch. We're going to switch the direction that the dough went into the machine. So if I put this side in first, this side's going to go in first this time. The reason why I switch the direction that it goes into the machine is so that the dough moves evenly and we're not just pushing the dough in one direction the entire time. Spreading the dough out, we're going to lower 1 more notch, switch the direction of what goes into the machine. This bottom half comes out. I'm using the backs of my hands to move and manipulate the dough. I'm not using my fingertips. Your fingertips will poke holes in the dough. I also don't have any jewelry on. No watches, no iPhones, no wristbands, none of that, because that's all going to get in your way and poke holes in the dough as well. Nice empty hands make all of the difference. We'll go 1 more notch down. And then this next step, what I like to do is a technique that I've developed, something that I find works really well as you're getting used to working with large pieces of dough. If you don't have a large area to work in, is to only take the dough down about halfway. So if your machine has a 10 settings, I usually stop at like number 5. If my machine has 6 settings, I'll stop whatever that halfway mark is. I don't want to throw out numbers because I don't want to confuse anyone, but this is halfway on my machine. And I want to show now what my dough looks like.
Halfway on the machine.
Halfway on the machine, and we're going to stop.
Halfway.
Halfway.
No matter what the number is.
No matter what the number is. If you want to stop 1 before the halfway because your dough is getting way too long and out of control, that's okay. Just remember what that number is. Now my dough, what we're looking at here, we see all of this wonderful texture. And this is a great example because a lot of people think you only get this texture by using a rolling pin, and you can't get it with a machine. Well, guess what? We just got it with a machine. Something else you also get with a machine that a lot of people say you can't is that a machine pushes all of these air bubbles and breathes life and squishes the life out of the dough. That's wrong. If you kneaded the dough correctly and you use your machine correctly, all these air bubbles stay in the dough, all that texture stays in the dough, and you have dough that looks like you rolled it by hand, but guess what? We used the machine. So all of that makes a difference. That pre-shaping, the rectangular movements, forming it into a nice ball, putting the pasta butt underneath. All of that is part of the process. So now we don't need to laminate any of this. We're ready to go and just roll it out and continue our entire process. So now I have my dough halfway sheeted. I'm going to take my little bit of flour, dust that over the surface. Now I'm going to just cut this into manageable pieces. Maybe that's 6 inches. Maybe that's 4 inches. You could start small and always go for something a little bigger. Then I can take all these little pieces. I can stack them up. And then I'm going to put them into my bag. So now I have all of these pieces that have been rolled halfway down on my machine. And then all I need to do at this point is take one piece, roll it down 2 more notches maybe, depending on your numbers, and you have a piece of dough that's ready to turn into ravioli. And you don't need to do this whole process. You don't need to deal with a very long dough snake. You don't need to have all this dough drying out on you. And you're just able to kind of like work in stages and have all of these batches. And this is something like we always do in the restaurant, is to make sure that you sheet all of your dough, you have it all cut into pieces before you start making any pasta. And then that way everything's organized and ready to go, and you'll have like this stack ready to help yourself. Now we're gonna grab our color that we want to work on, because yes, we've been talking about pasta, we've been talking about filling. We're actually here to do multicolored pasta stripes, right?
Stripes.
We're gonna do stripes.
Yeah.
There's a few different ways to do stripes. I'm gonna share with you one of my favorite ways and the way that I use the most. It's definitely the most time efficient way, but I'm gonna do the same thing here with this. Start it in a rectangle. Get a little flour on here. Start with my hands. And the same exact thing. I do the same process every single time, no matter what. So that's coming up. Keep this nice and wide. Now if you need to split it in half again and keep half in a bag and half goes into the machine, you can go ahead and do that. I know this is not too wide for me, and it's thin enough to go right into my machine. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. We good on questions?
We're good on questions.
Everybody's rolling.
Yes.
We're rolling, we're taking photos, we're documenting, we're making memories, more importantly, is what we're doing. We are making memories. Don't be afraid, we're a couple notches in to kind of stretch your dough to keep it in a rectangle versus letting it fall into that oval shape. Because there's nothing worse than when you're trying to roll out pasta and you end up with that really long tapered piece of dough that comes out of the machine that's almost impossible to use. It's incredibly frustrating. I don't want anyone to get frustrated. I want people to be like, oh my god, that was the easiest pasta making Sunday I've ever had. I want to make pasta every Sunday from now on.
Yeah.
And I want to hear about it, and I want to see it, and I love it. So we're bringing this down almost all the way. We'll even do the same thing with this one. I'm going to take it halfway. For the record, we still got our air bubbles. We still got our texture. Love your pasta machine, people. Love it. So we're going to go, whoa, drop bowl. We're going to go a little bit more flour here on this guy. We'll do the same thing. We'll cut this into manageable strips. I'm going to say, yeah, about there.
What tips do you have for the solo pasta maker with a manual crank?
So working in small pieces definitely is one of my biggest tips. So doing this kind of like breaking it down into small portions, because it becomes very hard to kind of hand crank yourself when you have this big long piece of dough versus like something that's only maybe like a yard versus like a yard, a foot versus a yard, and then that way you're not dealing with a crazy amount of dough. And then the other biggest thing is, like I said, focusing on this top part and not on the bottom that's coming out. But what's great about it is if you have a machine like that, you could always stop cranking and unravel the bottom if you need to, and then always still keeping that focus here on this top hand. I mean, I could do this all one-handed, and you could kind of just watch what I'm doing.
Let's do it.
As some tips as well. So, we have our first piece of green. This is going to be our overlay color. I'm going to do green stripes on the yellow ravioli, just as our first little round here to get us started.
Yeah.
To get us going.
Or whatever color you have.
Yeah. So whatever color you have, right? So we're going to go now down once more. I'm going to pretend I'm cranking. Crank. All right. Now if you stop, come down here, unravel everybody. Great, perfect. We're going to go down once more. I'm going to crank. Whew. All right. Now down to our final notch here. What's important, what I always like to do, is anytime I'm making any sort of filled pasta, I know the notch I'm going to stop at. So before I get to that final notch, I always like to put one more layer of flour down, very, very lightly. And that tiny layer of flour is then going to stop the dough from sticking when it comes out really thin. If you don't do that, there's a chance it could get bunched up on itself, or the dough is so thin it starts to stick to itself. And obviously we don't want that.
So this is the third from the thinnest setting you said to stop it probably?
Yeah, so this is either the second or the third from the thinnest.
Yes, great.
Depending on your machine.
Yes.
So you're going to test it out, and that's okay. Take a moment to test it.
Yeah.
Or do 2 different raviolis. Roll 1 whole ravioli to 3, roll 1 whole ravioli to 2.
And then see which one you
and
prefer.
see which one you prefer. And then you get to have like your own judge of a cooking competition show. You're the judge and the chef. And then you get to critique yourself. And you have to stand there in front of the judge's table. So it's like, whoa, what's happening?
But then you get to eat too. So
and then you get to eat too. So
it's like win-win.
Win, win, win. Triple win.
Yeah.
All right, we're on our last. We're cranking here. All right, we're through. So I know this is where I want to stop. I'm just going to lose these 2 little tiny edge pieces. You could save those if you want and re-roll them. Or you just, sorry, I got flour on my nose. Or you just, they're part of the pasta sacrifice, the pasta making experience. So now from here, depending on the length of this, we're essentially going to make noodles. So you almost get like a 2-for-1 here in this class. We're going to see how to make tagliatelle or tagliatelle or fettuccine or fettuccine, depending on what you plan on making. So we have this really nice long noodle here. I'm going to dust it much more heavily with flour. So I'm going to do exactly what I told you guys not to do because I don't want this to stick to itself. So we're going to go lots of flour here on this one in preparation of rolling it up. So we're going to do a little trifold action on this, almost like you would a letter or a legal document. I know nobody sends letters anymore these days, but we still need to learn how to fold things. Then we're going to come in with a knife. And we're just going to cut. Let me get these out of your way so you don't have to look at them.
Can I take them, Joe?
Well, I want them within my arm's reach for my purposes. Perfect. All right, so now we have some space here. Everybody can see what's going on. We have our letter folds here. Everything folded up nicely. Now we're just going to cut this into strips. So we could go with our knife. I usually take off that first one just to give me like a nice, clean, even edge. And you could go as thin and go super thin on this. Or you could go thick. Or you would have to unravel it. I was going to say, or you could use your fluted cutter. If you try to use your fluted cutter while it's all bunched up, what's going to end up happening is you're going to seal it to itself, and that'll get really annoying. So you could come in here with your fluted cutter, and then you have fluted edges, you have thick edges, and you have thin edges. And now I come in, I have all of my edges, I can scoop those all up. I'll give them a really nice kind of dusting off so they're not crazy covered in flour anymore.
Like magic.
And now this is where I come back to my holding bag. You'll notice this holding bag is a multi-use tool.
But it's very important.
Very important for this process because now the dough's starting to dry out. If we don't work fast enough when we're trying to do stripes, we're going to end up creating something that tears and breaks and rips when we go and fold it. And that can be one of the most frustrating things because you're putting all of this work into doing this and then it rips in the final moments. And so anything we can do to kind of keep the dough moist, to keep it from drying out while we are getting everything else in its place is going to be incredibly important. So now I have flour everywhere. Take a moment, dust down, get rid of all of your excess flour. That's why a bucket comes in handy here. And then that way you don't need to worry about getting too much flour all over the place.
Clean work surface.
It just becomes really hard to work when there's like flour everywhere. And it starts coming up in your face and you get all itchy. Calm. Alright, next. We have our filling. We have our eggs. We're still making our stripes. We need a piece of dough. I'm going to go back to the yellow. So if we remember, we stopped at that same point. And so we're always going to go back to that same point we stopped at. And that's what we're going to roll our... Oh, we just lost something. I still see me up there. Did something come unplugged? Hold on, everyone.
What became lost? Let's see. Oh, US webcam.
Hold on.
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties.
I still see it connected up there.
Just let everyone catch up.
Yeah, everyone can catch up right now. I think we're back. I don't know what happened. All right, we're back.
Quick clarification. What thickness are the green ribbons? You just cut half?
So the green ribbons are the same thinness that we're going to roll our ravioli to at the end. So 2 from the end, 1 from the end, 3 from the end, whatever that magic number is, the final thickness that we want is what I roll the ribbons to. And so now I'm going to roll this to that same magical thickness. 1 or 2, maybe 3 from the end, depending on your machine.
We have a question.
Yes.
Assuming you were making tagliatelle with those strips, do you let it sit at room temp for a bit prior to cooking it, or do you keep it covered until ready to cook?
So if you were making tagliatelle with the strips, real quick, I would let it sit at room temp, uncovered, before cutting it for 20, maybe 30 minutes. If you have like a hanging rack or something, if you let the sheet like this hang for about 20 or 30 minutes before you cut it, it's going to form a beautiful texture on the outside. It's going to lose a lot of that moisture. Then you could cut it up, you could bundle it, and then you could just keep it either on your counter, covered in a clean kitchen towel. You put it on a plate or a tray and put it in the fridge in a clean kitchen towel covered. I wouldn't like put it in a plastic container or like a airtight, because then you start running into moisture issues. But exactly that. I dry it before I cut it. You could dry it after you cut it, but I find it's better and easier to do it dried first. Cured is actually the right word. Cool? Yeah. All right, so now we have this roll to our thinness that we're going to roll ravioli to. This is the same thinness as this. Now we're going to combine the two. We'll come with a close-up. And now this is where having a little bit of water definitely helps, because this is not very sticky on its own, but you put one little spritz of water. And when you're spraying water, I like to do it up in the air and let the mist fall ever so gently down onto the pasta, much like if you're in the hairdresser and they're like hair, spritz water all over the place. They let it kind of mist down so it's an even bit of water, and you're not shooting a cannon of water directly at the dough, because things get too wet. And then you're going to come in with your strips, and you could get as wild and crazy as you want on this. I like to go across the dough. I find it creates more of a uniquely visual pattern. And I'm now just lining up these strips, and I'm just very gently pressing them down onto the dough. I'm going to come a little closer. Maybe you could see a little better. Go here for this, and that way we could come here. Perfect. Great. So here. And then I'll rip off that end, and then I'll just lay this on top. And you're really just going by your own visuals. You're not pressing it so much so that you're creating one even layer. You're just kind of pressing it to the point where it then forms onto the dough. So now maybe I'll go with a thin strip next. I'll do a couple of thin pieces. And you could spread these out or put them as close or as thin as you'd like. And this is where you really kind of get to show how precise and how much time and attention to detail you want to take on something like this. But also keep in mind, if you're working too slowly, when you go and try to roll this out or work with it as a ravioli, it's going to end up being cracking. And you obviously don't want it to crack, because you're putting all this time and love and energy into this. So I'm just very gently tapping this on. I'm not stretching the dough. That's something to pay attention to. Sometimes people take a piece and they try to stretch it over the surface. When you roll it out, you'll notice it'll give you a kind of deformed pattern. versus if you just lay it over the top and you give yourself a little bit of a room to work. And then maybe we'll come in with another piece here, and that's why keeping these in there will stop them from drying out.
Retain the moisture.
Helps retain the moisture. Pasta making is all about moisture management.
Science.
It's a weird phrase or way to word it, but very much so about moisture management. So now we'll come in here. Great. Now just a couple more strips.
And again, not too hard.
And not too hard. Very gently, just kind of pressing on, because we're not looking for like a total complete seal at this point. We're going to do a couple more things to get there. Ripping off the ends, reusing it, trying to get as little waste as possible. Now maybe go with one nice long one, just to finish off our pattern of going thick and thin, thick and thin. Great, that's done. This can go in here. Gorgeous. So now we have this piece of dough that has been semi-attached and completed here. I can lift it up, it's not sticking to the table, but the strips are not totally attached, like you can see. One just fell, which is exactly what we want. So now what I like to do before we put it into the machine is I come in here with my rolling pin and I go the width direction, not the length direction. I think that's important. You want to make the dough slightly wider than it already is. And then applying pressure in both directions. Now you're adhering the dough together, creating that one layer. Then you could come in with your knife or your cutter and you're just going to trim off right up against the edges. And then now you see why it's important you kind of like stretch the width of your dough is because you're cutting off that extra width that you just made. And now you have all these shaggy bits can kind of go out of the way. These I like to kind of bunch up and sometimes I'll run them through the machine together and you'll get like a tie-dye pattern of pasta, which is actually kind of cool and fun.
Tricky.
Oh yeah, especially if you're into that whole tie-dye lifestyle, you know? So now we have this beautiful patterned piece of dough, right? We're almost ready. But now you got to think, this is almost twice, if not 3 times the thickness of the setting we were just at. So now we need to open our machine back up, go wide again, and we're going to slowly work it back down to our thin setting in order to come out of the machine to be where we want it.
And then how wide would you say?
What do you mean how wide?
How wide on the machine?
Oh, so like I'm opening it back up to that magic number, that halfway number, to then bring it back down from there. So we'll go a couple of walking steps through the machine. Now this is important where you're really focused on this back hand so that it doesn't get bunched up coming in and out of the machine. Probably move your knife so it doesn't get in the way. Now we'll go with number 2. Beautiful. And now our final number here. Great. So now here we have our cover to our raviolis. And what I mean by the cover is we put all this work into this. This doesn't need to be the bottom. No one sees the bottom of the ravioli. So what we're going to do, a little trick here, is we'll take this. We're just going to very gently fold it up so it doesn't dry out. We'll do a little swap. I don't know if that's a phrase or a word or I'm making it up. It's okay. This will go in here just to stay nice and moist. And everybody can see what I'm doing. Now we'll take this other piece that's going to become the bottom of our ravioli. We're going to roll this through. And we'll go through it again. Now we're here at our bottom setting. exactly where we want to be. And for me, when I'm making raviolis, these big large ones filled with the egg, I like to work in square shapes. And so I usually don't measure this, but I'll measure for everyone because I know everybody wants to know and I'm kind of curious at the same time. So in order to get a square, I want to know my width this direction. I'm about 6 inches. So I know then if I go this direction, 6 inches, I'm going to have a nice square. So we're going to go 6 by 6. Is a nice square shape. We'll go right here. 6 by 6 is a nice square shape. This will save in our reusable dough pile. Now I have 2 squares that become the bottom of the ravioli. Now I can come in with my filling. I'm going to cut a hole. Now before anyone asks how big of a hole do you cut, it's totally up to you, whatever you're comfortable with. Some people like a very tiny hole, so they pipe very slowly. Some people like a huge hole, so it comes out fast. I like something in the middle. Why don't I tell you? Why don't I measure it? This hole is approximately 1 centimeter in diameter across. So we're looking at about a 1 centimeter hole. That's what I prefer. So now we're going to pipe a little stand for the base of where our eggs are going to go. So pick right in the center of each of these bottoms. And first we're just going to make a very small base. And this base is going to do 2 things. It's going to hold our yolk in place. And then it's going to provide surface for us to pipe the rest of our filling on. I don't like to pipe it all the way on the bottom because I want the yolk to be close to the bottom, so that way the yolk kind of cooks and it gets nice color all the way through and it's nice and warm. Where if you kind of did this all the way, then your yolk is sitting too high and it's sitting on filling and it gets kind of weird. So this is the way I like to do it. Then I'm going to come here. I'm going to crack a couple of eggs here into my separation bowl. Ever so gently. Try not to get any shells. Try not to break any yolks. If you do end up breaking a yolk before it goes into the filling, you can't really use it anymore at that point. It has to be whole, otherwise you're not going to get that beautiful runny yolk that everybody wants when they're doing this.
I want the runny yolks.
Everybody wants the runny yolks. It's that Instagram moment. So we got that. Quick little hand wipe here. Excellent. Now I'm going to put some gloves on just so my hands don't get all eggy. Feel free, if you have a sink nearby or if you don't mind your hands getting a little sticky, to skip the glove step here for separating your eggs. But because I want to stay here in front and center for everyone, I'm going to do the egg separation with the gloves. So we'll come in here, pick up our yolk, and just pass it back and forth, trying to peel that white away from the yolk. And you'll notice there's this little kind of a connector piece that are often on egg yolks. You want to try to remove that without breaking the yolk. Ideally, you're removing that little extra piece, and that way you're left with only the yolk and not any white. If your yolks keep breaking, consider where you're getting your eggs. The more healthy the chicken is, the better your yolk color is going to look, and the easier you're able to just kind of like put the yolk back and forth and it never breaks. So now you're going to just very gently land your yolk right in the center of that little holding zone. We'll do the same thing here with this one. We're going to peel the white away. We'll come in. We're just going to roll it off our fingertips, land it right there in the center. Try not to get any egg white onto your pieces of pasta. It's going to get in your way if you do. Make things extra sticky. We want to avoid that. I got a little bit of white on my table, so I'm going to just wipe it up. Just like I was saying, don't do that. If you do, clean it up right away.
Just be clean.
So now we're going to come in with our filling again, and we're going to pipe all the way around, creating almost like a castle or a crown on top of the yolks. And what this is going to do is 2 things. It's going to give us a ton of filling, so you have a really awesome filling to yolk ratio, but it's also going to protect the yolk as this cooks. So then that way the yolk stays liquid. It just gets heated and warmed all the way through, but it stays in that molten stage. Versus if you were to just kind of set the yolk on top and not cover it like this, you run the risk of the yolk overcooking while the pasta dough is cooking. Where here you're kind of like giving yourself an extra rim of protection. So now another layer. You could do this with ricotta cheese if you're not into potato. Same exact process, just with a different filling. So now we have our filling done. Those are ready to go. Now we'll come in with our topper piece. And the reason why I left this in here is so it didn't dry out while I was working on all of this. Because if this dries, it's going to crack and it's going to break when you try to put it over the top. So we want to avoid that. That's why we're working in stages. That's why we're not doing 20 raviolis at once. It helps to do 2. When I'm working my fastest, I could probably get 6 or 8 at once. And that's me.
That's very fast.
So keep in mind, if you're doing this, maybe 1 is all you really want to focus on at a time, because as the raviolo dries, it gets very hard to deal with. So don't let it dry. Work slowly, work at your own pace. Everybody has their own pace. We're celebrating individual paces here. So it looks like I'm going to get probably 2 raviolos out of this 1 piece of dough. So great, I'm going to split that. Now I have my 2 halves ready to go. I'm going to give my dough a little bit of a spritz so that way it sticks to it. And now this is where your cookie cutters come in handy if you have them. If you don't, you can do it without. So find the inverted size that's about the size of your filling. You might be able to get it a little tighter, but you could always go 1 set wider is usually a safe bet so you don't accidentally break your yolk. Then you're going to come in over the top. And you're going to very carefully make sure as you're doing this too, you have your pretty side and you have your inside. Inside goes on the inside, right? We're just going to very gently spread this over the top, and we're going to go to the edges, and we're going to slowly get this close to the center, pulling it outwards while trying to keep any air away from the center of the ravioli. And now this is where this piece is going to come in handy, because you can come right over the top with the smooth side, not the sharp side. The smooth side is where like a mason jar or a coffee jar or something inverted, maybe even a small bowl if you have one, would work well for this. And that way you're able to kind of come in and it creates your little barrier, so that way you can smooth out all of the dough around the edges. You create a bit of a cramp, so that way you have this nice beautiful mound that gives you your pre-shape to your ravioli. We'll come in and do the same thing with this one. Stretch this over the top. As you're coming in, I like to kind of give myself that guide, pulling out the edges, so that way nothing's kind of like crimpled over itself. And that's just because I'm kind of a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to these sort of things. If you notice that it starts to like crimple over itself, it's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You're just gonna have a much nicer ravioli by doing this. And you could totally cup it and seal it, but you do want to cup it and seal it. You don't want to just kind of leave it very loose, because the filling is going to kind of move around when you go to cook it, and you do want to kind of trap that filling right there in the center around those egg yolks. And now you have 2 options at this point. I like to make sure it's not sticking to my countertop. That's why the wood helps. You can go with your widest cutter and give yourself a very petite, perfect, and pretty cut of ravioli. And then this you could always use. I've done like back-to-back courses where I have like a really nice version of this and this, and you'll cook this on its own, and you can plate like garnishes or something really pretty here. And then the next course you get this piece of pasta that's totally different, but like the inner part, so that way you're getting the whole thing at once. Or you save this, cook it off, eat it as a snack. I'm going to add it to my little bit of pile of saved bits.
Maltagliati.
Maltagliata means badly cut. And then our other option for this one is we just want to come in here then and trim the edges just to give us a nice even square. And you can eyeball this, you can measure this, Just depends on how you're feeling, how confident you are with your hand motions. And then you end up with these two beautiful ravioli. Not raviolis. There's no S in raviolis. Ravioli is already plural. Raviolo is singular. Just something to be mindful of. No one's typing, we made raviolis today, because ravioli is already plural. So we made ravioli today. And we have this beautiful piece of pasta. A pasta pocket. Not a hot pocket yet, just a beautiful pasta pocket. We have these.
Not yet, chef.
The bench scraper works really well to help move these around.
Or your cleaver.
Or your cleaver tool, whatever it is.
Just be careful.
They can sit on the counter here because, like I said, wood is going to stop the bottom from getting sticky or wet. And then that way it doesn't dry out, it doesn't stick to the surface, and the wood's going to whisk away any excess moisture. If you don't have wood and you need to set them on something, dust a tray or cookie sheet with semolina. Semolina is a little more coarse, and it's going to stop things from sticking, and then that way you're going to end up with a piece of dough that doesn't get all wet and soppy down at the bottom. These ravioli, with the egg yolk, I wouldn't recommend making them more than a day in advance. I always make them the day I'm going to use them, because what ends up happening is the dough on the exterior will start to dry out overnight, and it's going to cook much slower than the inside dough. And what you end up doing is overcooking the egg yolk, waiting for the exterior to cook. Where if you use this same day, fresh, it all cooks at the perfect pace to where the exterior is cooked beautifully and al dente, and the interior stays nice and velvety and liquid molten egg yolk. Shall we do one more color? How are we on time? We're coming up on 2 hours. I hope no one else has anywhere to be. Let's do one more set of color, huh?
Are these difficult to cook because of the size /egg?
Yes. I wouldn't say difficult. They're different to cook.
So you don't want to pay it.
So we'll do that. We're not going to leave it here.
Yeah.
We're going to cook it. We'll finish it. I was just wondering if maybe we should do one more round of color, since that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And we could see something else. Why not? Right?
A little crisscross.
Little crisscross. Let me get some red action in here, huh? So we can see the whole rolling out process again. Everybody can digest what just happened over here with our ravioli. If we have any questions about it, that's what I'm here for.
Yes.
And if you need to run and you're like, oh my God, we're coming up on 2 hours. I only planned 2 hours for this. I'm sorry. We're going to go a little longer today. I'm okay with it, and I hope you're okay with it too. Buckle up. Here we go.
Max says, where do you buy your pasta tools?
Great question. So all of my brass tools come from Italy, and most of them you can't find online, unfortunately. Most Italian machine shops don't put their tools online, so it's either like I went to Italy and got them, or a friend of mine went to Italy and got them, and I bought them from them. All of these tools, actually, if you're not familiar with them, I actually have a pasta tool line with Doghouse Forge, which is a smith artisan out in Tampa. Well, lakeside. It's outside of Tampa. But makes all these tools, and my favorite thing about all of them is that he does all these different custom handles, all different types of wood, and they're all interchangeable tops. So you get these little tiny cutter tops. You have all different handles. You could go pizza style handles, pizza cutters, all sort of different things. He's doing bench scrapers for me now. And then we're in the process, because the machine process is much more complicated, for making these fluted style cutters like this. But they're coming very soon. We're working on it. We're trying to get them right out of Italy, and that way they're as perfect and similar to the ones you would find in Italy here. So good question. Pasta tools are one of those things I've been collecting for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Are just some of the many, 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 many different tools I have, but something I love.
Matthew says, is it possible to freeze these before cooking?
So I would not freeze these before cooking because of the yolks. Egg yolks get super weird once they're frozen. If you've never frozen an egg yolk before, just pop one in the freezer and see exactly what I'm talking about. Once it defrosts, it gets almost like jelly-like in a not pleasant way. So I would not freeze these before cooking. I would use them the same day you make them. They're a very kind of specialty pasta product. They're not like something you're, going to make a whole bunch of and store in the fridge or store in the freezer, you could make some for dinner tonight, make a whole bunch of ravioli with the potato filling and freeze them with just the filling, and that'll be absolutely great and delicious. And then you'll have frozen pasta set for the month or the day, depending on how much pasta you eat. But yeah, unfortunately, you cannot just freeze them in this form. It just won't work so well.
Elizabeth from Portland says, so great, let's keep going. Yay.
All right, yay. There's the encouragement I needed. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks for being here.
John said, when are fluted cutters available?
So we got held up. Long story short, he's in Florida. John from Doghouse is doing all the tools for me. And in Florida, whether you knew this or not, all the machine shops in the entire lower half of the country are contracted out by SpaceX, and they're all making rocket ship parts. And so if you were to go into a machine shop and ask them to cut you, 200 or 300 or 500 little brass cutters on their like water jet machines or laser cut machines, they're gonna be like, okay, but you need to pay us the same rate that SpaceX is currently paying to use our machines 24 hours a day. Nobody wants to pay SpaceX prices, and so nobody can compete with that. And so everybody's just building rocket ship parts right now to go to outer space. And so we're having a hard time finding a machine shop here in the US that's able to make these for us. He could do everything else at his machine shop, but he can't do these little fine edges that you see on like the fluted cutters. So I'm actually talking to my contacts in Italy at some of these pasta companies and seeing if we could buy direct from them, and then he'll assemble the wheels onto our tools here. As a little behind the scenes, the more you know.
Yeah, and then, exactly, Lorraine said, can we buy the tools from your line online?
Yes, so the tools come out in releases. They're not all available all the time yet.
They're handmade.
They're all made by hand, and they're not custom orders, but he makes them to order. So like you choose your handle, you choose your wood, choose everything you want, and they're all made, and he does them in about like 200 batches, 200 pieces at a time. And so I would say once a month, once every other month, he opens up the pasta tools available for pre-sale on his website. But I list them, I send out an email blast on my website if you sign up for my mailing list here on the recipe page or at joesasso.com. You'll get notified when they become available. If you follow me on Instagram, him and I both post about it on our stories and on Instagram, but they're only on his website, Doghouse Forge. And so just follow along, stay tuned, sign up for the emails, check the Instagram stories. We usually start promoting it at least a week in advance, so it's not like you find out 2 minutes before it happens. We're not trying to surprise anyone. It's just one of those things that has to do with, the labor of making tools by hand.
We do have another question about pasta. Lauren says, my beef dough is pretty rippled, rolling thinner. How do I fix this?
So you may need a little more flour. If you notice your dough is rippling, it means it's sticking to the rollers and like rippling in a bad way, especially when you start to get thin. So that's when you just need a little more flour. And that tiny bit of flour, don't forget to kind of like brush it into the dough. And that tiny bit of flour is going to help your dough not ripple. It's not going to stick to the rollers. And then that way it's going to kind of come out nice and smooth and clean and evenly. If you still see rippling, even with flour, you may be going too thin. And that's why I don't go to the thinnest setting. If you want to see what the thinnest setting looks like on here, even on a really nice machine, I'll show you. But then you'll kind of see exactly what I'm talking about, that like the thinnest is too thin. It's great for like pastries or crackers or something like that, but for pasta, it doesn't really work so well.
Not for pasta.
Not for pasta. So this is my halfway point. This is where I like to stop. This is where I'll cut my pieces that I need. Fold this up, save that. This is the one I'm going to use. These will go here. We'll stick this in this bag. Maybe I should have got one more bag out because I have 3 different colors, but you could always stack. They don't bleed. But you wouldn't want to store them overnight like this because they will start to stick together. So now I have this one piece. Now I'm going to roll this one out.
Lauren said it worked. Yay.
Oh, great. Yeah, a little flour.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are afraid to put flour because they don't think their dough's sticking. You need a little bit of flour. The flour gives you that pure texture that's on your dough. It almost makes it look like leather, which is nice in most cases. And come in here, final one, and this will cut for patterns. And this is going to be our piece for patterns, but if I wanted to just show everyone the thinnest setting now, this is as thin as the machine goes.
Just an example.
And it did almost exactly what Lauren was just saying, where it starts to almost like ripple on itself. And it gets like to the point where it's like so stretchy and so thin, like the tiniest little kind of like pressure on it creates uneven pieces of dough. And so it just gets very, very kind of hard to work with and too thin. You kind of see down here where I grabbed it too hard and just kind of like pulled it. And now it's kind of like stretching and getting really weird. And so this is why I don't go to the thinnest setting, and I usually always stop at least one from the thinnest. But like I said, every machine's a little different. Maybe you have that machine where you can go to the thinnest. Maybe you don't. I don't know. So now we're here. We're gonna go a little flour, lots of flour actually. What do we want to do here for this one? Has anyone ever done the polka dots? Shall we do some polka dots?
Yeah.
Let's do some polka dots. So I'm gonna go here with a fluted cutter. You can use a round cutter, use whatever you want. Let's go a couple of dots here. And we're just gonna punch these out.
Jenny says, thanks so much for this class. It's so informative and interesting. Yay.
Oh, great. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you for being here. Thank you to everyone for being here.
Yeah.
I love talking about pasta, and I hope I don't like throw anyone off by how in depth I answer some of these questions, because it's like, I don't know. For me, I want to know the why we're doing everything, not just how we're doing it. Like someone took the time at some point in my career to explain everything in depth to me, or I just asked a lot of questions and maybe got really annoying to some chefs or some people because I was like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And so I'm always still trying to learn. I have a lot of friends who are chefs, and Instagram's a great thing for that these days because you're able to talk to other people around the world and ask them questions about what they're doing that you may not have been able to do in the past. And so just understanding many different approaches, many different ideas kind of opens up your mind to learning and seeing new things. And I just love talking about that and sharing that. And I appreciate everyone being here.
And many different cuisines, and yeah.
One of my favorite things about Italian food, and I think is like a great, I don't even know what to call it, learning moment for the difference between Italian perspective on cooking and doing things versus like a very American perspective. I'm not like putting Americans down or anything, but like in Italy, food is different depending on if you go 10 feet to the south or 10 feet to the north. Like your next door neighbor will make ravioli, pasta dough totally different than you, and neither one of them will say the other person is wrong. They'll just say, oh, that's how you do it, this is how I do it. And oh no, that's how they do it, this is how I do it. And so like the idea of, oh, this is wrong, this is right, is a very like way that we look at things here. It's like, oh, that's the right way, this is the wrong way, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. It's like there's no right or wrong way in Italy. It's like this is how they do it, this is how I do it. And they just both understand that they would never do it the other way. They don't like the other way that guy does it, and they will never do it. They may never even eat his version, but they're not going to say that it's wrong. And I think that's like a really interesting approach to not only like life as a human being, but food and cooking in general is like there's not a wrong way to do something. There's a way that you like, and there's a way that they like, and there's not necessarily, something wrong with either one of those ways. And so I love that about Italian food and Italian cooking. Some people get very frustrated by it and turned off by it, but I find that like approach to Italian food incredibly romantic.
Ken said, great class. I'm way too slow, but it's working.
Great. Yeah. Like I said, I've done this many, many times. So I'm much more quick at it than perhaps you may be with this being your first time. But don't let that discourage you. Work in small batches. Work at your own pace, because that's all that matters.
It is a labor of love.
It's not a race.
And Isabella says, this has become one of our favorite Sunday traditions. It's been really awesome to see your confidence and technique grow.
Yes, so good. I love that.
So nice.
All right, so I'm gonna grab another piece of dough here. So now I have all these little rounds. I have this, which could be really fun to play with. Let's play with it. I'll bring this down. So now we have this piece, we have that piece. Let's take a look at what we're gonna do here. Let's give ourselves a little bit of a surface. We're gonna take our cut out overlay, and why don't we just set this on top of here. And it doesn't need to be perfect. It's gonna get stretched out a little bit in the machine. Kind of give us a little bit of a pre-adhere, a little bit of flour so it doesn't stick. I always like to use the rolling pin to kind of give me a little extra insurance before we go back into the machine. But now we have this kind of cool polka dotty speckled pattern. And then we can open wide. Check that out. That's super fun. Abstract. Now you could use this for ravioli, you could use this for lasagna sheets, you could use this for any sort of filled pasta shapes. And you have this really awesome kind of like crazy pattern that you're playing around with. So I'm just gonna roll this up, stick it back in my bag for now so I could use all of these little guys before they dry out. We'll do one more round with these little ones and then we'll go into cooking our ravioli. And then that way we'll all see how to finish this and bring it full circle all the way around. Let's go a little wider. And you kind of like find your own rhythm, you'll find your own pace. Great. So now we have this end piece of dough. It's kind of a little tapered on the side, but that's okay. So now we'll take all of these little stars and we could either do a very precise pattern with them or you could be very organic. Just setting them all down all over the surface of the dough. Oh, this looks awesome already. I'm excited for this. You know, if you wanted to cut super thin lines, you can do that and lay really, really thin lines and get super precise lines all over everything. There are no real rules for this. There's a few different ways to do it. I've seen other techniques where you like stack the dough, which I think only works to an extent, and you need a very specific hydration for the dough. So I don't really like doing or teaching that version. It's much more labor intensive when I already think this is labor intensive enough. So we got all of our little stars already on there. We can come here now into our machine. Move wide again. Don't let it bunch up on you. Aha, look at that. So fun. I love it. Check it out. So great. I'm like looking around like there's a bunch of people here. I'm just proud of myself. You should be proud of yourself too. It's okay. We're making pasta. We're making art. We're doing really cool stuff. Should we do another ravioli with this?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, why not? Why don't we do this? Let's do, if you did not want to do the filled ravioli, you could just do a little
you can
fold over,
show that.
right? So let's show that. Just in case you didn't want to do the egg yolk and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not into egg yolk. And it's like, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just fold this over itself, and I'm going to find my little halfway mark. I like to just put a line there because then I know where the halfway mark is, and this is my top half, this is my bottom half, and I don't need to cut the dough in half, but you can cut the dough in half if it makes you more comfortable. So now I'm just going to pipe nice big dollops down my dough, and then I'm going to give it a little spray. I will fold the bottom half over the top half, over each one. And now this is where I like to come in with my inverted cutter again. And we go right on top of each little dollop of filling. Now we have all of these pretty little raviolis. I like to come in and just make sure everything's pressed and sealed around each one, just so the dough isn't too thick. Because once again, keep in mind, you are folding 2 layers over itself onto 1 layer. So if you don't take the time to press it down, you will have extra thick pasta, which some people may like, some people may not. Now I'm going to come in with the fluted side for each one of these. You know, why don't we go a little bigger? We have the space.
Yeah, I would say a little bigger. We do have a question from Cleo. Great class. You said at the beginning sometimes it's better to use more whole egg versus more egg yolks in your dough. Which pastas are best for each?
I find noodles sometimes benefit from whole eggs in the dough. I really like tortellini, like the classic tortellini that has mortadella and prosciutto and like that really heavy meat filling, to have whole eggs in the dough. And if I'm maybe not doing intricate colors and patterns, I'll do whole eggs. Or if I'm like in a hurry or I'm limited on the amount of eggs. More times than not, like my go-to pasta recipe, the one I would like use for dinner in the restaurant, is the one that you all have. The one where it's like 10 to 13 yolks. Very rarely will I use the one that has whole eggs just because I don't like it as much. Like I've tasted them side by side. I don't think it's as good. I don't like the texture as much. I think this is better. And that's just my, personal preference. Obviously, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. So if you really like the other one better, no one's stopping you from using it. But I personally don't love that as much. So here we have our reused dough. And so this, we could easily, now we have this nice piece. We could roll this back through the machine. We have this crazy like marble pattern, almost like Damascus style pasta dough that we can put through the machine. We can make another round of raviolis with them. Ravioli. I almost said it.
Oh.
We can make another round of ravioli with them, and you will be eliminating all of your waste. So now we have all that done. Let's get our cutters put away. We will turn our... You know what? I can't turn my water on yet just because it was a little chilly in here and my butter solidified. So I just need to melt my butter, because I'm going to use the butter to top my pasta, and so I need my butter a little bit warm. I like to add some fresh herbs to my butter. Sage, rosemary, thyme, hard herbs. Hard meaning like these ones with a thick stem that are like chewy and hard, where you wouldn't necessarily eat the herb, but they're called hard herbs. Work really well for infusing into butter. Something soft like tarragon, chives, basil doesn't infuse as well. It doesn't carry that same flavor. It wouldn't necessarily be my first choice for putting into infused butter like this. Not to say you can't, it's just not my favorite. And then you essentially have 2 options. If you're familiar with glazing pasta, or making like a nice butter glaze by swirling together melted butter and pasta water, you can do that on top of your ravioli, but more classically is to do an approach like this, where you're infusing your warmed butter with the herbs. They should sizzle ever so lightly when you drop them there into the butter. And now that's going to be our topping for our pasta. It's going to be loud. Great. I'm going to grab a bowl.
Chef Joe.
I know. I'm going to turn my water
grab
up.
a bowl.
I need to grab a bowl. Real quick, it's right here. I have a plate cabinet nearby.
How much water should everyone have?
That's a good question. Hold on. Excellent question, Bella. I haven't left. I have not gone too far. So when you're talking about raviolos, we're talking about cooking now, right? So, important part. Totally different than cooking, let me rephrase that. We're talking egg yolk raviolis, the ones with the egg yolk in them. You're not looking for a giant pot of water that needs to be very deep. This is where you want to pull out your like wide pot because we only need surface area. We don't need depth. So like if I had a large wide saute pan and I had a few of these to cook, that's perfect. If you have like a big wide rondeau or like Dutch oven style pan, that's great. What you don't need is your deep pasta cooking pot because you'll probably only get to cook 1 or 2 in there because you don't want these submerged all the way below the surface of the water. They're going to sit right on top, wide in your pan, giving you plenty of space for them to move around and to float around and to not kind of fall below the surface. Where if you were to put a whole bunch of these and they're all kind of stacked up on top of each other, the egg yolks are not going to cook evenly. And that's the thing that you're paying attention to. You want these egg yolks to cook properly. We're going to season our water now. Same thing I've said a million times before. Pasta water should not be as salty as the sea. It should taste like water soup. It should be like a well-seasoned stock. It should just taste good. And if you're not sure how much water that is, take it, or if you're not sure how much salt that is, take a taste. You know, you could do a couple of teaspoons per quart of water is a good place to start. Don't be afraid to stir it in. And then you taste the water. Is it salty enough? Does it taste good? Does it taste like anything? If it doesn't taste like anything, you need a little more salt. But by no means should it taste salty.
Not salty like the sea.
Not salty like the sea. Stop saying that. Whoever started it. I know they're not here in class with me today. But whoever did, I don't know.
The same person who started that you should throw pasta at the wall.
Right? You don't need to throw spaghetti at the wall to see if it's done. You just taste it. Some crazy person. You know what it was? It was a practical joker. And they were like, you know, it'd be really funny if I convinced someone that the pasta water should be as salty as the sea, then they need to throw spaghetti at the wall to see if it would stick. Either way, that's not what we're looking for.
No.
All right. Now what we are looking for is a gentle simmer here. Another difference of when you're cooking these egg yolk pastas is you're not looking for a rolling boil. We're talking like 215 degrees, like right at that like boiling point, where it is ever so gentle of a simmer, but by no means a boil because things just get wild and out of control at that point. And we don't want wild and out of control. We want really nice and gentle. So that way the egg yolk doesn't overcook.
Don't want to get wild.
Save getting wild for the weekends. This is Sunday. We're chilling. All right?
Joe, how to save the color of the pasta while boiling? Do you have any tricks?
So the color of the pasta, depending on the pasta color that you use, will change and fade potentially. All of that has to do with the quality of the powder that you used and how much powder. Purees tend to hold the color a little better because there's more of the vegetable in it. But if you get a really high quality powder, there's more of the vegetable in it versus a low quality powder. In which case it won't lose its color as much. You put more of it in there and it won't dye and lose color as much. And then some colors just won't hold when you go to cook them. Like blue spirulina looks beautiful and blue, but it kind of turns to like a dark lavender when you cook it. It doesn't stay like that vibrant blue color just because science. Yeah. Yeah, there's no like secrets or tricks. It has to do with the quality that you're using and how much of it that you're putting in there.
And the color too.
And the color itself. Some just cook better than others. I'm very close. My water is just ever so bubbling slightly. If you have more questions, now is the time. Keep hitting me because we're very close to the end, and I don't want to keep anyone here much longer than they need to be.
Or if you're not doing anything, because.
Or if you're not doing anything, come over. We're hanging out. No, wrong, because we're all still social distancing and wearing masks.
Yes.
Had to throw it in there. Like, come on. That's one, time stamping this live stream. So that way, when we watch it a couple of years from now, we'll be like, oh my God, remember that?
Whoa.
And then secondly, it's important that you actually wear a mask. All right, we are very close to boiling here. I'm going to lower this just so it doesn't get out of control. Tiny little bubbles. We're going to drop in one of our ravioli here. You know what? Let's do this one.
Raviolo.
I'm gonna go with the small one. Yeah, raviolo, because I'm only putting one in.
YOLO.
Because YOLO, right? So let me move this so you can see my face. Whoa, that's not what I meant to do. Okay. So now we're coming in here. We're dropping down into the water, and we're gonna set ourselves a timer. 3 to 4 minutes is all this is gonna take. In the restaurant, we always had a timer when you're cooking raviolo or ravioli that has an egg yolk in it, because timing is everything here. So 3 to 4 minutes is that magic number, not at a rolling boil. And then the other thing that you're watching in here as it goes in is that it stays right side up. You don't want this flipped over, because in reality, that top part of the pasta is super thin. It's only one layer rolled really thick, and so it's going to cook more quickly than the bottom and the sides, which is 2 layers pressed over itself. So the sides is really the part of the raviolo, that you need to focus on cooking. If you see that your water starts to boil, pull it back ever so slightly, just so it doesn't, go crazy. You don't want to cook the yolk by any means. We're just heating it through so it's nice and hot. If you have a cake tester, like one of those little needles that you would stick into cakes to tell if they're done, you'd use the same thing here. If you're ever unsure, you would just pull it out of the water, stick your cake tester in it from the side, so then that way you're not poking the yolk, but you're just kind of touching the center where the filling is, and put it to your lip. It should be warm or hot. If you put it inside and you feel it and it's still cold, it's not ready to go.
But don't put it through the center.
But try not to poke it, because you don't want to pop your yolk, obviously. Having one of these spider tools is very, very helpful when you're dealing with ravioli that are filled with egg yolks. You definitely don't want to pour this into the sink in the colander, because it's incredibly delicate. It's very finicky. Delicate. It's delicate. It's just delicate. It's not finicky. It's delicate. You don't want to mess this up. We put so much love into this. Let's take our time. Let's use the right tools. Question.
Yes, couple questions. Marissa said, what are your top go-to pasta sauces?
Top go-to pasta sauces. Number 1 is butter and pasta water. And think of this before I give you my answer. Maybe you saw this on my Instagram story the other day. Maybe you didn't. But it's a mindset that I think everybody needs to start thinking of when they talk about pasta, is that pasta is the marriage of the noodle and the sauce. Pasta is not something you have that you add sauce to. Pasta is that final product when your noodle and sauce have come together, they've emulsified, they've become friends, and it's essentially that condimento, or that condiment and pasta water and the noodle that then gives you pasta in its whole entirety. So that being said, I really like just butter and pasta water, really nice aged Parmigiano on top. Game over. Other times, I'm a sucker for a good bolognese, even though that's not the most Italian thing. It's very much more Italian American. There's no town called Bolognese in Italy, so it's definitely a more of an Italian American dish. But I grew up eating it, and I absolutely love it. We are looking at 2 minutes right now. We're coming up on the 3rd minute.
And then we'll answer questions after?
Yeah, unless there's one more question.
Oh yeah, there's tons.
Oh, let me get one more, but as this has 1 more minute on it.
Okay, great. Isabella said, what are other shapes do you think are fun to show off this colorful dough?
There are only a few shapes that I wouldn't. I was trying to think the other day of shapes that I wouldn't do with a colored dough like this. Ones where where most of the shape is on the bottom. So just think of shapes that where you see everything on the top. Something like a even a scarpinote would look really nice. I've done those before with the stripes.
Yeah.
Can you think of anything that wouldn't look nice?
Just in terms of the little tortellinis. Probably
Yeah, little tiny shapes wouldn't work as well. Larger shapes are great, like this, because then you kind of see all the pattern and everything to it, versus something smaller. All right, we're at 3 minutes. We just hit it. 3.5 minutes. So I'm going to drain off. I actually like to take a little bit of that pasta water with me when I go into my bowl, because that does 2 things. That little bit of pasta water has some salt, which is going to help season things throughout. And then it also kind of helps cut through the richness of the butter that we're going to put on top. So that way you're almost creating your own sauce in the bowl, so that way we have pasta. So don't forget to give your butter a nice little swirly whirly, so that way you're getting all of the brown butter bits that are on the bottom of the pot and have settled. And I like to go usually 1 spoonful. For me, less is more when we're talking about this. Some people go crazy and put tons of butter on top. I don't like that when it's a broken brown butter. If it's like an emulsified butter sauce with pasta water in the pan, yes, give me all the butter. But in this case, I like to limit it. I usually come in with a little bit of extra parm. That's for like that added saltiness, because again, it's a unique style of condiment we have here. We have that loose butter. We want that saltiness. We want the bite. We want the umami. We want it all to come together.
Smells so good.
Now the moment of truth. We're going to cut into it, and we're going to have a moment.
Are we switching the...
Should we? Should we go for the close-up? We'll have our moment here together. We're going to go right into the center. Oh, there it is. Someone just nailed it. Ooh, check it out. And so that yolk comes out. That becomes part of the sauce. I'm going to cut myself off a beautiful little bite here. You got the brown butter. You got that molten liquid egg yolk. And if you've never had anything like this, I'm very excited for all of you. And then you're going to go and make brown butter chocolate chip cookies right after this. Wow. You know what? This is the first time I've done it with the potato. I almost always do ricotta or some sort of cheese as the filling. And I thought it'd be really fun to do with the potato. And I am loving it. The rosemary in the butter, game changer. So it's not just brown butter. You get that nice little bit of like herbaceousness. And oh boy, I need one more bite and then I'll give you a bite. One more for me.
And then we can answer questions.
Oh.
I hope everyone else is on this stage too.
Wow. Oh, so good. All right. I'm energized. I'm recharged. Where are questions at?
Yes, we're back to the shapes. I think just play around with it. Anything
Yeah, I don't think there's a wrong answer
yeah,
there.
you can even do like, tagliatelle without...
Yeah, you can even cut into noodles with the stripes and it'll look awesome.
Look really beautiful.
So I don't think there are really any limits to what you can do with it.
And then he did an amazing sauce class a few months ago. Check it out. Yeah, that's a great...
Yes, that's a good answer. That's on demand. If you're interested in that sauce class, send me a message on the Chef's Feed app website. And I can send you the links to sign up for the sauce class. I think we did God, that was a ton. I think we did 6 or 7 different sauces.
And you did them in like an hour and a half.
And we cooked right through everything. And it was definitely all about the sauce. I think we used boxed pasta for most of it.
Yeah, just to help.
And some leftover noodles from making dough.
Yeah, like
for one of them.
Night at home.
But definitely a good introduction to understanding sauces and building sauces from there.
And then have you used other types of egg yolks for the center?
Yes, great question. I've done little tiny ones like this with quail eggs. We used to do those at Quince for like VIPs, where you'd have a quail egg in the center and be a little mini version of this. And we do like a nettle and ricotta filling, which is just like bonkers, so good. And then I've done giant ones like this with duck egg yolks. You have giant duck egg yolks that are like super decadent, really rich, heavy,
They look like dinosaur eggs.
Yeah, well, no, ostrich eggs look like dinosaur eggs.
Well.
I have not done one with ostrich egg yolks. Those are huge. I've heard like an ostrich egg yolk is equal to like 28 chicken egg yolks or something crazy. But I have not done it with that. See, I've done duck, chicken, and quail. I think that's it.
Duck, chicken, quail.
Yeah, duck, chicken, and quail.
Yeah. Do you have any recommended cooking time adjustments for altitude? 6,000/2,000 M.
Altitude won't necessarily change the cooking. Just monitor your water temperature. It's going to be hard to get it to a boil, which is probably fine for you. I don't think it should necessarily change the cook time too long, maybe an extra minute. You could always test one out or just test a piece of dough out without the egg yolk in it and see. I think what may affect you more is if you're cooking this from room temperature, if you're cooking this from warm, or room temperature, or from cold from the fridge. If it's coming right from the fridge, usually you need at least another 30 seconds, maybe 45, to get the heat all the way to the center, versus room temperature cooking it right now and it never actually hit the chill box.
And then when you were in Colorado, you saw that was like a little bit of...
Yeah, I did pasta all the whole time while I was in Denver on Top Chef, and even as we traveled throughout Colorado and kept doing it. And I didn't necessarily notice a difference in cook time for any of the pasta. It was more a difference in making it, with it being such a high altitude and the arid, dry nature of being in Colorado.
Yeah. Chef, do you always use just double O flour, or are there cases when you use some mix, for example, with semolina?
Yes. The answer is yes. For filled pastas, I will almost only use 00. I'll use other kinds of wheats, but usually ground to 00 fineness because I want the flavor of the wheat, but just finely ground. Occasionally, I'll use semolina, a blend of semolina and 00 for flour and water doughs that are not getting stuffed. Things like cavatelli, orecchiette, peachy, all of those style of shapes. I'll do half semolina, half 00. And I think I've even posted that recipe on my Instagram.
Alexa says, if you are prepping the ravioli earlier in the day, what's the best way to keep for cooking for a few hours later?
So cooking these either on a cookie tray lined heavily with semolina, so that way they don't stick. Because keep in mind, down here there's a ton of moisture down in this bottom part, and things can get very sticky very fast. So monitor that. I don't necessarily think you need to cover them or worry about doing anything over the cover if you put them in the fridge for a couple of hours. And keeping them in the fridge will help firm up the filling, and it won't weep out as much into your dough. So I would just do the semolina cookie tray, plate, something, keep it cold, and you'll be good to go. You don't need to worry about freezing them or covering them or containers or anything.
And if you just do some without the egg, probably pizza box is best.
Yeah,
right?
Pizza box is best. I know not everybody has clean, fresh pizza boxes. That's obviously the best way to store any type of pasta. It's in a pizza box. Pizza box whisks away any excess moisture and acts like a wooden surface, and then the lid will catch any condensation that may happen to form. If you don't have pizza box and you're just trying to store pasta long term, I usually put it on a tray or something, and you can cover it ever so gently with a clean kitchen towel, and that'll kind of protect them from the blasting cold air of the fridge. But I've heard people say storing pasta is like storing your kids. You don't just put them in the other room and forget about them. You kind of got to watch them. You got to check on them. You got to peek in every hour or so and make sure everything's okay in there, and you're not just doing it blindly.
Paul says this is excellent, the money shot, and then Ken said delicious. Thanks, y'all. Another question is, while on the topic of flour, there are two types of 00 flour from Caputo. There's a chef's flour 00, and then there's the one you linked below is pasta 00. Is there a big difference?
Yes, Caputo actually makes, I think, 3 or 4 different kinds of 00 to get even more complicated. And the reason they do that is because they provide mostly to restaurants, and chefs in restaurants have different uses for 00 flour. And when you say 00, you're just referring to the fineness that it's ground. And in Italy, where Caputo is kind of basing their entire brand from, is you say 00, but then you're talking about percentages. And when you say percentages, you're talking about protein percent. And so it's much more common there to say, oh, I need 00 that's 14%, or I need 00 that's 10%. And so here in the US, we're not used to saying anything like that. We just don't ever talk about protein percentages, but it makes a big difference when you're talking about bread, pizza, pasta is your big main 3. And ideally, you're using different flour for pasta, pizza, and bread. You want different levels of protein in those 3 different flours. So while they're all ground as fine as can be, there's a different level of protein in each one. Personally, I've tried them all for pasta, and I like the brown bag, the gnocchi and pasta flour that I linked below. I think that one is only, I want to say 12% protein, where some of the other ones are higher, 13 or 14. You could look on the bag. I'm drawing a blank on it. But you could use the red or the blue bag that's 00 for pasta. You're just going to have a slightly different texture. You're going to have a slightly different dough. The recipe might change slightly. But at the end of the day, you could use them pretty much interchangeably. But to answer your question, they're not the same. And those are the differences.
And then what's the best way to store the ravioli?
We just talked about that.
What's the cooking time for non-egg yolk ones? If we made some without the egg yolk, just with the potato filling. Thanks, it's delicious.
So I would say about the same time. You want at least 4 minutes. You could probably go 5 just to cook them a little more all the way through. But it's the same thing. You you don't need to monitor it as much. You could leave it on a boil, just have them going. You're going to have less of a chance of them overcooking, and it's just much less delicate of a process, but about the same cook time. It's the same dough. It's rolled to the same thickness. You just don't have to like be right there on top of it.
Yeah. And then Cassandra pointed one thing out before we go answer any more questions and anybody leaves. The taco emoji.
Yes,
Before
thank you.
anyone else
Before anyone
leaves.
goes, for everyone that's still here, thank you. Appreciate you. Thank you all for being here. As my gift to all of you, I want to introduce the taco emoji. Maybe you're familiar with it, maybe you're not. Use the taco emoji, find me on Instagram, send me a direct message with the taco emoji, ideally in that first line, so I see it right away. And then that way, it's our way of communicating because we're pretty much BFFs now at this point. You've supported me. I want to support you in all of your cooking endeavors. So whether you have a question about pasta, something you're working on in the kitchen, use the taco emoji.
Hot
It's
dogs.
our little secret.
Hot dogs,
Yeah.
chicken,
And
whatever.
then that way, I can find your DM in the midst of some of the craziness that people DM me, and I'll be sure to get back to you and spend the time to talk to you about whatever it is that you're wondering. If you loved this class and you're looking for more future classes, all the previous ones are on demand. You can find them, message me, I can send you the links. But what I'm even more excited for than those, drum roll,
Is
next week, focaccia pizza. We're going into the world of bread. So much comes along with that class, from mock schedules, interactive spreadsheets, dough making videos and processes, as well as the whole live stream for making, in my opinion, like the best pan pizza.
it's so good.
It's so good. Like, I want to make it every other day. I'm not upset about it. And I'm so looking forward to getting to teach people about bread and taking a break from pasta. Because I'm just as passionate about bread as I am about pasta, and I want to share all of that. So that's available as well to sign up for if you have not already.
Back to questions. Paul says, I've been using Thomas Keller's pasta recipe. Small amounts of milk, olive oil, and vinegar. Do you ever add these ingredients?
It's a great segue. I know a lot of people who use that recipe, and most, I don't want to say most people that do. I don't like that recipe. I'll just say that. And the reason being is because when I look at a recipe, I want to know what each ingredient is bringing to the party in terms of like what it's doing for the recipe, what it breaks down to, like if you were talking about the compounds of it. So like pasta dough is essentially flour, protein. You got your egg yolk, which is mostly fat. You got your egg white, which is protein and water. But then you start introducing other ingredients. You got olive oil. Okay, it has fat. All right, but there's a little flavor there. Do I want the flavor of olive oil in pasta dough? Probably not, because I'm making pasta, not olives or anything that has to do with olive oil. So I'd rather add an extra egg yolk than the olive oil. Okay, next ingredient, milk. What's milk doing there? Well, milk is mostly water. There's a little bit of fat. How can I change that up? Okay, maybe I add a splash of water and an extra egg yolk. Great, I'm still back in my original ingredients and my original flavors, keeping things as pure as possible. Vinegar, what's that adding? All right, acid, maybe it's helping with discoloration, stopping oxidation. Maybe it's affecting the boiling, but it's also kind of adding flavor. It's changing the texture. Not really a fan of it. I'd rather just use really high quality eggs. I'd rather store my dough well and use it fresh and right away, and I don't need to worry about it oxidizing, discoloring, or the need of vinegar. So I approach it from that kind of perspective where I want to keep it pure, simple about the eggs, about the wheat. No need to add in milk, olive oil, citric acid, vinegar, whatever other crazy stuff you might put in there. And sure, maybe that recipe works for him and it's great for the French Laundry and wherever he's at, but
It wasn't for Quince.
it wasn't for me. It wasn't for Quince. I'm not into it. And like I said, there's nothing wrong with it, but that's not how I like to look at it.
Great. And Kathy says, my favorite pasta flour is Palo Mariani, the one with the little red riding hood on the package.
I don't know if I've ever used that one, but okay,
I'll
cool.
have to look it up. Sabrina says, thank you so much for this class. Stephanie, thank you for the class. Kathy, thank you for the class. Great. Okay.
Great.
No more questions.
All right. Well, thank you to all of you for the class. I appreciate you all inviting me into your homes. Don't forget to tag me on Instagram, because if you don't take photos first, it's not going to taste as good. I don't know if that's true.
I don't know if it's true, but we really want to
Anyway,
see
I want to see what you're doing. I'm inspired by it. Thank you for everything. This will be on demand. If there's anything else I can do for you, don't forget the taco emoji. Thank you to Bella for answering all the questions and handing the chat. And thank you to all of you. You just made pasta and some beautiful edible art. I love you.
Edible art.
And everyone stay safe out there.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Enjoy your raviolo. Brown butter and